What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto family denied him and inherited the power of Star? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Ancient legend spoke of a man called the Sage of Six Paths, the Rikudo no Sennin, the originator of chakra. Not many knew of them and even fewer believed them to be true. Even lesser-known legends spoke of him having two sons, Ashura and Indra. They were always conflicting. The elder, having inherited the power of their father's eyes, strove for power, believing it was the key to true strength. The younger, having inherited the power of their father's body, yearned to bring everyone together in peace, feeling that the bonds of kinship was the only path to true strength. When their time passed, their spirits were reincarnated regularly all throughout history every couple generations, and each time, the two reborn brothers would be drawn towards one another and do battle in one way or another, be it one of blades or minds. But not once did they achieve what their father wanted of them: worldwide peace. Thus, each pair of reincarnated souls became stuck in a cycle for ages immemorial. Until, one day, something in Ashura changed. His beliefs remained the same, but one of his reincarnations deviated for a short time, wandering over onto Indra's path of power, but managed to stumble his way back to the path of unity. Because of it, it caused an unforeseen change in Ashura's transmigrating spirit that caused it to gradually transform little by little with each spiritual rebirth. Unknown to the other party, the same occurred with Indra around the same time, causing similar, yet entirely different changes in the elder brother as well. Within his personal, spirit, realm, separate from everything else in existence, the Sage of Six Paths felt a ripple in the cosmic energies that surrounded him. Something had changed in the cycle, something that stirred up a feeling of hope in him for his two wayward sons. He could only wait, wondering if the current cycle would end differently than the infinite number of times beforehand. "Geez, do we have to go back?" the rather short teen grumbled with his hands clasped behind his head, walking alongside his godfather and teacher down the road back to his birthplace. "I mean, can't we travel for a couple more years first? You know I don't like it there." "Yes, Naruto, we do. Sensei's orders. Besides, we're already running late because of you." Jiraiya of the Sannin answered with a slight chuckle, which only got louder when the teen sighed out a draw-out groan of disappointment. With how he liked to procrastinate, the white-haired toad sage would have thought Naruto was related to the Nara clan, but he was too energetic and passionate to be counted among them. Casting a sidelong glance at the 16-year-old boy he had been looking after for the past 6 years, Jiraiya couldn't help smirking slightly at how far Naruto had come since the obnoxiously loud-mouthed 10-year-old midget he had originally taken under his wing and cared for, as per his duty and loyalty to his last student demanded. However, it wasn't his duty and loyalty that spurred him to take the boy on as an apprentice and godson. It wasn't even due to a prophecy he had been told years ago by the elder sage Toad. It was almost entirely because he saw a lot of himself in the kid when he was that age. Standing at 5 feet 9 inches, 16-year-old Naruto had well-tanned skin from constantly being out in the sun, with spiky and shaggy knee-length golden blonde hair pulled back and tightly bound with black cloth from the base of his skull all the way down to the end, with only a short tuft of his golden hair left uncovered at the end, while his bangs were left free to frame his face and brush against his collarbone on either side of his neck. His eyes were a dark sapphire blue, while 3 whisker-like birthmarks adorned either of his covered cheeks. Like he often was, Naruto was clad in a pair of baggy black pants that were tightly bound with black cloth from the knee down, with a golden-colored sash wrapped around his waist, black tabby socks covering his feet, and black metal Geta sandals with golden-colored thongs for footwear. His lean and chiseled torso was covered by a black skin-tight turtleneck underarmor top with long sleeves that ended in black full-finger gloves and a black cloth face mask attached to the collar that was pulled up over his nose. A half-face mask of golden metal attached to it that had 3 horizontal vent-like slits running across either cheek and a small circular hole-like vent in the front middle. Covering his arms from fingertip to shoulder were sleeves of golden metal that armored his chest and upper back, as well with black leather straps keeping them held in place. A gorget of the same golden metal covering his neck completely, while similarly crafted shin guards of the same golden metal were strapped to his forelegs with black leather straps. Situated under his sash was a simple black leather belt with 6 black leather holsters hanging from it, 3 at either hip, that held a golden yellow storage scroll in each one. Attached to the belt behind his waist were 4 plain gray equipment pouches filled with various items that he deemed necessary. "Gah, can we at least go a little faster and get this over with?" Naruto questioned irritably from his spot. "The faster we get this done, the better. How you managed to complete the basics of sage training, I'll never know." Jiraiya grumbled, getting a hidden mischievous grin from the blonde, though the glint in his eyes was unmistakable. "I'm just that awesome," he retorted cheekily, getting a half-hearted glare from the older ninja. He then frowned slightly as he thought of something else and looked back ahead, hands still clasped behind his head. "I wonder how strong Karasu is now." "Oh ho? Missing your little girlfriend again?" Jiraiya teased, only to get hit with a rather strong backhand to his stomach, stumbling him and making him cough as he doubled over. Blushing slightly beneath the face mask, Naruto scowled irritably as he glared out ahead of him. "Moody, much? Shut up, perv. It's not like that," Naruto growled quietly, never noticing Jiraiya's knowing smirk as they kept walking. "I just want to find out how much stronger the two of us have gotten since we made that promise to each other back then, alright? That's all. Besides, she's more like a sister to me than anything else." Rig oof. Once more, Jiraiya's teasing resulted in getting hit in the stomach again, this time with enough force to drop him to the ground. Finally coming to a stop in her usual daily training regimen, Karasu tilted her head back and looked up at the sun to gauge the approximate time. Standing at 5 feet 5 inches, her obsidian hair reached halfway down her back in a high ponytail, her chin-length bangs left free to frame her face and cover her left eye. As she had for the past couple years, Karasu was dressed in a pair of beige-white short shorts with a dark blue belt holding them up, a beige-white tube top, a dark blue zippered long-sleeve jacket over it that cut short just below her small A-cup bust with the Uchiha fan decorating the back, black fingerless gloves on her hands, and dark blue kunoichi sandals on her feet. Almost time. She was the last of her clan, all of whom having been slaughtered by her own elder brother, Itachi. She was never the same after that dreadful night, having been placed under one of the most powerful genjutsu known to the world, Tsukiyomi, by Itachi, and forced to relive the slaughter of every Uchiha time and time again in the span of a single second. Karasu knew she would have turned out to be ultimately cold and uncaring of anyone and anything if it hadn't been for an obnoxious and irritating blonde kid that stumbled into her life a couple months after the massacre. It took her some time to warm up to him, but because of him, she had actually managed to befriend a few others. She still wasn't very social, though, and the best way she could describe herself as was blunt. She didn't sugarcoat things for anyone and really didn't care if she hurt someone's feelings because of something she said or did. Strangely, it only drew more people towards her, something that she wasn't exactly sure she liked or not. "I should start getting ready," she mused idly while still staring up at the sun with squinted eyes before heading inside, a faint smirk forming on her lips as she wondered how much stronger her best friend and rival had become in the past 6 years. "Uchiha Karasu?" Iruka called out, currently taking roll before he started the graduation exam for the aspiring genin he had been teaching for the past 8 years. "Here," Karasu spoke up quietly, something that surprised Iruka a little bit. For the past 6 years, Karasu would merely raise her hand to signal her presence without ever giving a verbal response. Although confused as to why she would choose now of all times to break that habit, the scarred Chunin figured she must have been excited by something. No doubt, the prospect of finally becoming a full-fledged ninja of Konoha. Spotting another name on his list below Karasu's, Iruka looked a bit confused, having never had it on his list before. Uzumaki Naruto?" he inquired, but there was no response. From her spot, Karasu wondered what was taking the blonde so long to arrive, internally worried about him a little bit. She refused to acknowledge it, though, let alone admit it to herself or anyone else. "Is there an Uzumaki Naruto here?" Before he could mark the person absent on his list when he received no response, the door to the classroom was thrown open and a blonde teen in black clothing and golden armor stumbled through the door, looking as if he had been shoved unexpectedly. Noticing the dispersing wisps of smoke out in the hall, Iruka could only an eyebrow and look back down at the blonde picking himself up off the ground, dusting himself off. "Uzumaki Naruto, I presume?" Iruka questioned curiously with a flat stare, getting a sheepish chuckle and eye smile from the teen as he stood up, rubbing the back of his head nervously. Unknown to them, Karasu, in her usual seat near the back of the class, was staring at the blonde with slightly wider than normal eyes. It was the blonde's strange choice in armor that caught her eye the most, the polished and almost gaudy golden metal being incredibly eye-catching. It was also quite reflective when it came to light from being well polished, most likely something he did on purpose. She wouldn't know for certain until she was able to fight him again, but if he was like she remembered him being, he was notorious for his unorthodox methods in just about everything. And his tricky nature as a prankster, which made him even more unpredictable. Alright, go find a place to sit and we'll get to the testing shortly. Hi, sensei, the blonde responded, still eye-smiling, before turning and looking for an empty seat. Spotting one, he went towards it, giving the person next to it a cheerful eye-smile. Is this seat taken? Hyuga Hinata blushed shyly, but shook her head negatively instead of responding verbally. As he sat down beside her, he gave her a quick glance over. She stood a little under 5.5 feet in height with a slim and lithe physique that bore a well-endowed hourglass figure in the works. The trademark pupil-less white eyes of the Hyuga clan, light cream-colored skin, and straight dark indigo black hair pulled back into a low ponytail that ended just past her shoulder blades. She was dressed in a pair of baggy and airy black hakama-style pants with small slits in the sides at her hips. A black skin-tight backless and sleeveless top that did little to hide her blossoming bust and slim waist, black skin-tight arm warmers that went from her wrists up to the middle of her biceps, a lavender-colored sash wrapped around her waist, a pair of more elegant-looking black kunoichi sandals on her feet with slight wedge heels to give her an additional inch in height, and a baggy lavender hoodie over her top that was left open with white sleeves and lavender cuffs. I'm Naruto, by the way. Naruto introduced himself, extending a golden armored hand in greeting. Blushing a little more than before, Hinata lightly grasped his hand in return. Hinata. And nice to meet you. She stuttered quietly, making eye contact for only a moment before her blush redoubled, forcing her gaze downward before she did something embarrassing. A few rows behind them and on the opposite side of the class, Karasu found herself glaring at the two, her cheeks warmed with a slight blush, but why? She had no real reason to be acting like she was unless. No, that was simply impossible. There was nothing about Hinata for her to be jealous about. Except maybe her chest. She mused idly as he gaze dropped to Hinata's well-endowed chest before eyeing her own, her indignant blush burning a little hotter and brighter than a moment ago. That was when she spied an obviously empty seat beside her, her internal fuming resurging with the revelation. That jerk. He looked right at me and saw the empty spot beside me, but he blatantly ignored it. Oh, I'm going to kick his ass for that later. Yamanaka Ino? Iruka called out one of the last names on his roster. I told you I'd pass without messing up anywhere. Naruto jeered impishly later that day as he, playfully, punched Jiraiya in the arm, but in his excitement, remained absolutely oblivious to the amount of strength he put into it, sending the Toad Sage crashing into the far wall. Sarutobi Hiruzen, sitting behind his desk in the office, could only watch the interaction with wide, awestruck eyes. He had not been expecting the blonde to get so strong. Jiraiya had told him that the boy had learned a few things from Tsunade during the few times they ran into her during their travels, but neither had been prepared to find out that he learned Tsunade's and the Shodem Hokage's secret for such incredible strength. Sensei? Stop fooling around over there. Get up. At least my life won't be so boring now. Hiruzen thought to himself as he started puffing on his pipe again, watching as Naruto nudged the barely conscious form of Jiraiya with his toes, his armored hands stuffed in his pockets lazily. Naruto had just come from the academy after the test, his Konoha Hite tied around his waist over his sash on a strip of black cloth with the plate situated in front of his left hip. The Sandame had to agree with Naruto, the blonde having scored perfectly on each of the tests, but the Chunin, Amino Iruka, had made a note on Naruto's score sheet about his taijutsu. While incredibly strong and fast, Naruto fought more like a brawler, though Iruka admitted that even he had an issue with spotting any openings in his defense, let alone taking advantage of them. Iruka's estimation of Naruto's taijutsu style coincided with Jiraiya's last monthly report on the blonde's training. Noticing something out of the corner of his eye, Naruto looked up from his sensei and out the window just as the man started picking himself up off the ground while rubbing his arm. Spotting someone, Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly in determination as he pulled his hands from his pockets, his fingers slowly curling into fists while a small smirk remained hidden by his mask. Noticing the change in his student's demeanor, Jiraiya glanced out the window and couldn't help smirking, seeing one Uchiha Karasu standing on a rooftop across the street from them. Her arms crossed over her chest as she stared directly at Naruto almost expectantly even though her facial expression was stoic and blank. "Sensei. Yeah, go on, get going." Jiraiya didn't even finish what he was saying before Naruto darted out the open window and took off at full speed, Karasu following after him as they headed in the direction of the nearest training grounds. Chuckling quietly, Jiraiya took a seat in front of his old sensei's desk before sighing slightly, still grinning. "Gaki. I swear, he's like a perfect blend of his parents. And not just in personality. Yes, I gathered about as much from your reports. Naturally talented in Fuinjutsu, an unnaturally quick learner in ninjutsu and taijutsu, possess more chakra than most Junin." Hiruzen trailed off towards the end, a slight laugh escaping him as well. "He's nothing short of a juggernaut already. I can only imagine what kind of trouble he'll end up getting himself into when he gets older." "Oh, no, you did it now," Jiraiya suddenly exclaimed as he jumped to his feet and jabbed a finger at his old sensei, looking rather nervous and worried, confusing the elderly Sarutobi. Seeing his sensei's look, the Toad Sage answered his unspoken question. "Every time someone says anything about him and trouble in the same sentence, something happens. Every time, no matter what. I even went so far as to tie the kid up and put a bunch of seals on him one time. He was knocked out and I stupidly said something about not having to deal with the brat's irritating ass and what happens? Trouble, that's what. Honestly, Jiraiya, you're overreacting. Nothing's going to." Hiruzen was cut short by a rather loud explosion coming from one of the nearby training grounds. A faint tremor rumbling through the earth and buildings at the same time while a thick cloud of black smoke rose from the point of the explosion. Jiraiya simply gave him a flat look that screamed, "I told you so, happen." "See?" Jiraiya hissed venomously with a glare before disappearing in a shunshin to check on his student while Hiruzen sighed and slouched in his chair, puffing irritably on his pipe. The Sandaime had a feeling that his ongoing battle with paperwork was going to get a whole lot tougher on him. And fast. "What the hell is wrong with you? Do you have rocks for brains?" Karasu bellowed furiously as she kicked Naruto in the back of his leg, making the blonde cry out in pain slightly and limp away a few steps. She would have punched him in the arm, but she wasn't dumb enough to do that while he had his armor on. "Seriously, what could have possibly possessed you to make an exploding tag that damn powerful? You nearly killed us both, you idiot." Hey, it was my first experimental one, okay? I didn't think it was that bad," Naruto argued, only for a thought to occur to him, scratching the back of his head thoughtfully. "Although, it certainly would explain why Sensei couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry when I showed it to him the other day. I swear, you're the biggest idiot I've ever met, Naruto." Karasu groaned as she palmed her face with one hand, the other braced on her hip. Currently, they were both coated in a light dusting of dirt and ash from the explosion. She was surprised, however, when a white-haired man dressed in red and green kabuki-style clothing appeared via shunshin, only to suddenly punch Naruto in the back of his head, glaring at the blonde. "Ow!" the Uzumaki cried out, clutching the back of his head in pain. "What did I tell you about showing off like that?" Jiraiya snapped angrily. "And I thought I told you not to use that damn tag you made. Especially around friendlies. I thought it was the other one." Naruto growled at the man, glaring right back at him. For a moment, Karasu swore the two were somehow related to one another with how similar they were behaving. Then, the smoke started clearing where Naruto had placed the exploding tag and she glanced over at it, expecting a shallow crater or something. Instead, she was left a little slack-jawed when she saw the deep hole blown into the ground. It was easily a good 10 feet deep and almost just as wide at the top of the opening. That was no exploding tag, it was a damn bunker buster. How the hell do you mistake one for the other? They look nothing alike. I thought I taught you better than that, you bubble-headed blonde. Jiraiya snarled before getting punched in the face with enough force to bend him back at the waist, but he showed surprising balance and stability when he didn't even stumble back. "You take that back, you perverted old bastard," Naruto roared, only for Jiraiya to lurch forward and headbutt the blonde, causing the teen to take up Jiraiya's previous pose. Bent back at the waist, head cocked back from the blow. Staring at the two with a flat look, Karasu was wondering whether or not she should distract the immature duo somehow before an all-out brawl broke out when the white-haired man suddenly cried out in pain and covered his forehead with his hands. "What the hell is your head made out of, Brad?" Jiraiya demanded angrily. "Headbutting you hurts worse than one of Tsunade Heime's punches to the face." "I'm just that awesome," Naruto practically yelled back as he swung back forward and headbutted Jiraiya in return, knocking the Toad Sage flat on his back and out cold. Huffing frustratedly, Naruto crossed his arms over his chest stubbornly. And then he remembered Karasu was still there and glanced at her, only to flinch slightly when he noticed that she was watching him with a cold, unblinking stare. Karasu? What's with the scary look? Baka. She sighed out before looking down at her clothes and scowling. Turning that scowl on her friend, she kept talking. "My clothes better not be ruined because of you. I'll buy you a new set, if they are." He responded with a sheepish eye smile, rubbing the back of his head. He never saw the faint, almost non-existent blush that decorated Karasu's cheeks as she looked away. He was too caring. Calming back down just in time before he saw any signs of her being flustered, Karasu decided to call it an early day. "I expect to have a proper fight with you tomorrow. And no exploding tags. Got it?" Karasu responded before ordering, getting a nervous nod from the blonde. Nodding once to show her approval of the response, she continued speaking while turning to leave, briefly waving over her shoulder. "Good. Now, I'm going home to get cleaned up. I'll see you here tomorrow morning." "Hey. All right, see you then, Haim," Naruto called out after her with a mischievous grin, noticing how she visibly tensed at the remark and hesitated in mid-stride, but kept walking while muttering, "Baka," under her breath, her cheeks flushed heatedly. Snickering at her reaction, Naruto knew it would get under her skin. She always hated being called princess in the past, something he discovered when he found out that she had been the daughter of the Uchiha clan head. At first, it was just something to call her other than her name, but it eventually became an inside joke between them, mostly for his own amusement. Looking down at his unconscious sensei, Naruto sighed. Not really wanting to carry his unconscious sensei anywhere like he usually did when the senin had had too much to drink, Naruto simply turned and started walking away, knowing the man would be perfectly fine where he was until he woke up. Later that night, Naruto was sitting atop the Yondaime Hokage's head on the Hokage monument, golden armored hands clasped behind his head as he stared up at the night sky. Despite being home, he felt restless, having grown used to traveling all of the time. That, and there was so much he had wanted to do earlier during the day, but didn't have the time to do, that he was simply too excited to sleep. Sitting up and crossing his legs under him, Naruto was going to meditate for a little while to calm himself back down, but before he started, he noticed something unusual down below. Narrowing his eyes and momentarily grateful for the now natural night vision gifted to him from constant exposure to the Kyuubi no Kitsune's chakra, among a few other things, Naruto spied the figure fleeing from the administration building, which he knew to be mostly vacant at the moment since he and the Sandaime had been among the last few to leave the building just an hour ago. Plus, the person looked like they were in a hurry with something on their back. "Something's not right," he mumbled quietly to himself before standing up and simply stepping off the carved head of the fourth Hokage, letting himself plummet the 200-meter distance in freefall. Adjusting his position as he neared the ground, Naruto landed heavily in a kneeling crouch, one armored fist pressed against the ground as spider web cracks shot out in all directions from the point of impact while a thin cloud of dust was tossed into the air. Letting the almost unnoticeable protective chakra shell fade from his skin, Naruto sprinted forward before jumping up to the roof of a nearby building, heading in the same direction the other person had been going. Quickly catching a glance of the person he had spotted from his perch a minute ago, Naruto felt that his original assumption of something being wrong was right. Adjusting course, he locked onto the figure and started getting closer. After a couple minutes of pursuit, Naruto slowly recognized the person. Wasn't he Ruka-sensei's assistant or something? What was his name? Mizuki, I think. "Quit babbling to yourself, you aggravating brat." The Kyuubi suddenly growled from within the blonde's mind, catching Naruto off guard and making him stumble slightly. Thankfully, he didn't give himself away and didn't lose sight of the pale-haired Chunin he was tailing. I swear, if I could, I'd kill myself just to end the suffering of listening to your irritating voice. Oh, shut up, furball. It gets lonely when you don't have anyone to talk to. Naruto retorted in his mind, getting an annoyed growl-like grunt from the fox sealed away inside of him. He couldn't exactly argue the point since it was true. Besides, I think better when I do. Sure, you do. Kyuubi grumbled sarcastically. Naruto could practically feel the giant fox spirit roll its eyes and couldn't resist doing it himself before breaking the connection and focusing back on task. That was when he caught a glimpse of the writing on the oversized scroll slung across Mizuki's lower back, the forbidden scroll of sealing. Eyes narrowing dangerously, Naruto resisted charging in and taking him down immediately. They were still in the village, and if the fight got a little too intense, innocents would be put at risk because of his carelessness. Thankfully, they weren't far from the outskirts, the Chunin obviously going rogue and betraying Konoha. Hearing a quiet but dark growl in his mind, Naruto knew the Kyuubi was in full agreement with him in terms of Mizuki's judgment. Abandoning one's home and birthplace for whatever reason, no matter how trivial, was tantamount to treason in their opinion, and neither dealt with betrayal well. Stealing village secrets while in the process of doing so was even worse. Kyuubi. Naruto mentally growled at his tenant and spiritual companion the moment he breached the tree line along the outskirts of the village. Mizuki still kept within his line of sight. The nine-tailed fox spirit didn't respond, but still obeyed the unspoken command. A moment later, Naruto's blue eyes bled into crimson with black slit pupils as the Kyuubi's dark chakra flooded his body. Suddenly strengthened and empowered by the Biju's energy, Naruto dropped from the tree branch he had landed on, but the moment his feet made contact with the ground, he shot off with such an immense burst of speed and power that the ground he had been standing on practically exploded, sending chunks of dirt and other debris flying through the air. What the? Mizuki didn't get the chance to finish as he turned around to momentarily investigate the unexpected sound, but he was struck by a man-sized projectile of black and gold. It was in the split second that contact was made that his perception of time froze and he saw exactly what hit him. Already doubled over the fist embedded in his stomach, Mizuki saw only that strange late-enrolled student from earlier in the day, but those eyes. Those fierce, menacing ruby eyes. He was just a kid back then, but he could never forget those eyes, a thought passing through his mind like a flash of lightning. Kyuubi. And then time continued normally to the Chunin. Rocketed back like a cannonball while Naruto came to a complete stop at the same exact time. Mizuki flew nearly 50 meters, crashing through tree limbs the whole way, before finally touching back down on the ground, only to be sent tumbling and rolling and bouncing for another 30. Sliding to a stop at the base of a tree, Mizuki was instantly stricken with a severe coughing fit, choking and gagging as he tried to refill his forcefully emptied lungs while clutching at his abdomen, an almost black bruise already forming to cover most of his front while strips of more bruising formed on his back from hitting some of the branches. He didn't need medical knowledge to know that at the very least he had minor internal bleeding from the blow, at least 3 cracked ribs, and a cracked sternum, if not other internal injuries alongside the cuts and scratches all over his body sustained from the branches he crashed through. That scroll is the property of the Hokage of Konoha. Hand it over now. Naruto spoke up coldly and clearly while approaching the downed Chunin with a slow and measured gait, his furiously burning eyes locked on Mizuki and his armored hands tightly clenched into fists. Before I take it from you, you traitorous thief. Wah! What are you? Mizuki gasped out in terrified whisper as he finally regained his breath, hunched over on all fours and staring up at the golden armored teen with shock and past fears, unable to look away from the eyes that had haunted his nightmares for the past 16 years. Deciding to humor the man in a rare show of cold-blooded sadism, Naruto maintained his cold glare while reaching up and pulling his mask down, revealing his whisker-marked cheeks. Immediately, the Chunin recognized him from that sole trait. Mizuki's fear instantly became hatred, his cowering expression a spiteful glare. You're supposed to be dead. Many people have said those same words to me in my life. Naruto responded quietly while putting his mask back in place, never once looking away from the Chunin. I have proved them wrong every time, and this time will be no different. We'll just see about that. Mizuki hissed before swiftly hurling a handful of shuriken at the teen and rushing in behind them, hoping to create an opening he could exploit. Unflinchingly, Naruto raised his left arm and blocked the throwing stars with the golden armor covering his forearm while cocking his right fist back at shoulder level, never once blinking or breaking eye contact with Mizuki despite the sparks thrown up by the throwing stars clashing with his armor. Eyes widening as he realized his impromptu plan failed. Mizuki barely had the chance to dodge to the side before Naruto's fist shot forward like a bolt of golden lightning and slammed into the ground with the force of a meteorite, a rippling shockwave spreading through the ground as a small crater was left from the impact and a dust cloud kicked up into the air. Hoping to use it to his advantage, Mizuki retrieved one of the two giant shuriken on his back and got it spinning as fast as he could in his grasp before throwing it at the exact spot his target was last seen occupying. Instead of the sound of steel piercing flesh or a cry or sound of pain and agony, he heard only a metallic clang and the constant shriek of metal grinding against metal. "I'll only give you one last warning. Hand over the scroll before I take it from you." Naruto spoke up coldly as the dust cloud thinned. The golden armored blonde revealed to be holding the still spinning shuriken by the ring and using his chakra to maintain its rapid rotation, the metal grinding against his armored palm like a poorly maintained power saw. Mizuki could only stare at the blonde in absolute shock. "And you do not want me to do that? Why won't you just die?" Mizuki howled before hurling his other giant shuriken at the teen, only for Naruto to throw the one in his hand. Both large projectiles deflected off of each other, shooting off in two different directions. In that same moment, Mizuki bit back a curse and jumped to the side just in time to avoid being turned to paste by another of Naruto's punches, the Chunin wincing and losing his footing, stumbling as he clutched at his abdomen where he had been punched earlier, the pain finally starting to override the adrenaline rushing through his body. Bursting out from the dust cloud brought about by his previous attack, Naruto shot straight at the Chunin, who could only watch with wide eyes as the red-eyed genin cocked his right hand back while the distance between them was closed in the blink of an eye. He also heard Naruto utter a single phrase, his tone even colder than before and barely audible. "Yoroi Barika." This time, instead of a fist, Naruto's armored palm slammed into his chest with the thunderous echo of a cannon being fired, driving Mizuki down into the ground with the power of a mountain being dropped on him. The hand retracted an instant after contact was made. He was unable to make a sound or move any part of his body, his entire body having locked up as he laid in the crater's epicenter. Reaching down, Naruto wasn't gentle as he rolled Mizuki over and took the forbidden scroll from him, the leather strap holding it in place snapping easily under the strain of the teen's strength. Creating a cage bunshin without hand seals or even uttering the name of the technique, Naruto passed the scroll to the clone before, lightly, kicking Mizuki back over onto his back. Staring down at the older shinobi with the same menacing look he had been giving him since the beginning, Naruto simply stood there while a team of Anbu appeared in the area, the blonde's clone passing the scroll to one of them so that it could be returned to the Hokage. "You should have listened to me." Unable to speak or move his body, Mizuki could only stare back at the golden armored genin with unadulterated hatred and terror. Expression unchanging, Naruto slowly turned and walked away, his clone poofing out of existence since it was no longer needed any longer. As he walked away, the Kyuubi's chakra gradually receded back into the seal, Naruto's eyes fading back to their natural sapphire and the newly graduated genin starting to tire now that the rush of raw power and strength faded away. The true strength of his Yoroi Barika taijutsu technique wasn't his physical might, but the raw pain the strike inflicts, which paralyzes the nervous system and locks up the body's motor functions. He had come up with it as a non-lethal technique, though still quite an admittedly painful one. It was honestly only because of his morals that he didn't kill Mizuki for his treasonous attempt. Instead, the Anbu division can take care of that for him. "It seems you are most definitely stronger than you first appear, Naruto-kun." Sarutobi Hiruzen mused to himself while leaning back in his chair and puffing on his pipe, having watched everything unfold through his crystal ball, something Senju Tobirama, the Nidaime Hokage, had designed and made in his spare time outside of the wars as a means to keep an eye on things all throughout Konoha. Sighing out another breath of smoke, the Sandaime glanced back at the stack of files on the genin graduates from earlier in the day and then at the stack of team requests. Picking up one of the sheets of paper that depicted the scores for all of the academy students that had passed the exams that afternoon. You certainly like to make things difficult for others, don't you, Naruto-kun?" The next day, Karasu found herself feeling a little nervous for some reason as she made her way to the training ground she and Naruto had been at yesterday. They had always been strangely competitive, but it always paid off for the both of them since they were constantly pushing each other to get stronger. Because of that old rivalry, they surpassed everyone in their class and possibly everyone in their generation. And yet she was nervous about having a friendly spar with her childhood friend. Then again, Naruto had been the lucky one to gain an apprenticeship under one of the Sannin, a seal master and sage, at that. She was lucky to have a Junin take her under their wing and teach her. Having tracked them down herself and nearly resorted to blackmail, she was so stubborn in her efforts to convince them to help train her. It had actually been her stubbornness and tenacity that ultimately convinced the Junin to train her, not the admittedly empty threat of blackmail. She stayed silent as she rubbed her left arm absently, recalling the hardships and trials she had to endure to reach her current level of power. For a moment, Karasu would have wondered if Naruto had gone through similar problems, but she knew him a little too well. He probably went through worse due to his own stupidity. The thought brought a faint smile to her lips, remembering how clumsy the blonde used to be when they were kids. I doubt that part of him has changed any since we last saw each other. A few moments later, she finally entered the clearing they had been in yesterday afternoon and immediately eyed the crater that still scarred the training ground's main clearing. Once more, she suddenly felt a little nervous about the coming spar with Naruto. Before she could continue that train of thought, a stiff breeze blew through the area and the trees swayed in response. However, the mid-morning sunlight glinted off of something off to the side, catching her attention, but when she looked, she was honestly a little surprised by what she saw. Sitting in a meditative lotus position just within the shade of a tree at the edge of the clearing was Naruto. His hands balled up into loose fists with his armored knuckles pressed together and resting in his lap, his head bowed slightly. Quietly drawing closer so as not to disturb him, she was honestly surprised that someone as hyperactive and loud as him could sit still that long, let alone achieve the slightest degree of inner peace and calm that came with true meditation. But Karasu didn't hold her look of surprise for long when she realized that he wasn't meditating. Typical Naruto, he's asleep, she thought with a flat look before sighing quietly, another faint smile taking hold. Just before she could attempt to wake him up, however, she noticed a few things about him that made her suspicious of what had transpired since she last saw him yesterday afternoon. For one, she spotted flecks of dried blood on his armor centered mostly around his arms and a couple micro-droplets dotting a small part of his metal face mask and part of his upper chest. The armor on his hands was smeared with dirt and there was a light dusting of dirt all over his body and in his hair. She froze in place almost immediately, her mind racing with potential scenarios and feasible reasons as to why he would have been in a fight to begin with. In the past, Naruto had always been very defensive, very protective, if not a bit overly so, and deathly loyal to people he trusted and cared for, but she had never known him to be openly violent towards others without reasonable provocation, such as someone being bullied or wrongfully attacked. Whether it was a verbal or physical assault, it didn't matter to him. Past knowledge aside, all of the signs pointed towards the fact that her friend had been involved in a fight recently and, for the moment, she couldn't imagine why. Whoever he fought, they were in a whole new world of pain at the moment and Naruto was the god that had created it. With who and how bad the fight got, she had no way of telling, but it would explain the distant sound and vibrations of tremors she had heard and felt late last night. Just what was he truly capable of? Karasu didn't know and, once more, found herself questioning whether she really wanted to find out or not. In the end, she decided it might be best to wait a little while before they sparred, just to give her more time to collect a little more information on her childhood friend and rival. Instead, she figured it would be better to wake him and get him cleaned up. Kneeling down, Karasu reached over and put her hand on his shoulder. "Hey, Baka, wake up," she said while shaking him slightly. The reaction wasn't quite what she expected. Her eyes snapped wide open when one of Naruto's hands suddenly caught her wrist in a vice grip, but he didn't otherwise move from his spot. After a moment of nothing, she tried tugging her hand free, but Naruto's grip wasn't going to let that happen. He wasn't hurting her, but it was uncomfortable and she couldn't break free of it. And it was aggravating. It also didn't help that she heard someone snicker behind her. "You fell for it too, huh?" Jiraiya questioned as he walked closer, having arrived just moments before Karasu. but had sensed her approach and took to hiding just to see who it was that was looking for Naruto, if that was what they were doing. The white-haired sage then started pouting childishly, his arms crossed over his chest stubbornly. The brat picked up that damn irritating habit a couple years ago, all because I borrow a little bit of money from him while he was sleeping. The little bastard's a heavy sleeper, too. I don't care how it started. How do I make him let go? Karasu growled at the senin before planting a foot against Naruto's shoulder and trying to pull her wrist free. Naruto's arm didn't even bend at the elbow or rotate at the shoulder. He wasn't even unbalanced by the act. It was as if he was made of stone or something. Audibly growling with frustration, Karasu was becoming sorely tempted to hurt the blonde in some way just to wake him up and make him let go. Jiraiya snickered again before answering her question. That's a trick for me to know and for you to figure out on your own. Jiraiya teased while chuckling, though he was being entirely honest. He ignored the Sharingan-enhanced scathing glare Karasu shot him as he grinned like a fool. I'll give you a hint, it's a lot like a finger trap in human form. Anyways, now that I've found out what became of my student, I'll be heading out. Keep him there for a little while, will you? Who did he fight last night? Karasu suddenly asked just as Jiraiya turned to walk away, making the man stop in his tracks. Someone that picked the wrong night to turn their back on Konoha. Jiraiya responded seriously without turning back around to face her, keeping the details a secret since it was, technically, an S-class secret deemed by the Sandaime and an official, A-class mission of sorts that Naruto had been paid for. Apart from stopping a traitor to the village and aiding in their arrest, the details of said mission were blacked out and censored, along with being restricted from anyone knowing of the mission's existence, let alone access to censored file. The Hokage and a small handful of others were the only ones with clearance to know of and review the file. As an afterthought, Jiraiya decided to fill Karasu in on one of Naruto's biggest issues, though it wasn't exactly a secret to begin with. Just a word of warning, that boy's got a temper that even I tend tread a little carefully around him, and one of his biggest triggers is betrayal and abandonment. Do me a favor and try to keep him calm and out of trouble while I'm gone, will you? Karasu didn't answer, but she didn't need to, and they both knew that. Waving lazily over his shoulder as his usual demeanor returned, Jiraiya finally left the area via Konoha Shunshin, leaving the kunoichi to her fate. Mentally filing the new information away for later review and focusing back on the task at hand, said Uchiha glowered at the armor-plated blonde holding her in place. Blushing slightly out of flustered frustration, she felt like an animal with its foot caught in a snare trap. It made her feel weak, and while Naruto had broken her of her desires for revenge against her older brother for the most part, she absolutely loathed feeling weak. It made her feel as powerless as she did the night Itachi murdered their entire clan. Only that fear turned into anger now, but despite that anger and feeling like a trapped animal, she wasn't so willing to hurt herself to get free. Whatever it was that had a hold of her, however. Wake up! Karasu barked out angrily while bashing the top of the blonde's head with her fist. Ow! Naruto cried in that same instant, unknowingly releasing Karasu's wrist in his efforts to hold his hurting head. Spotting Karasu, he gained a look caught between an indignant glare and a childish pout. What the hell, Karasu? Why'd you hit me? Because you wouldn't wake up, and you need to get yourself cleaned up. Baka, the Uchiha Kunoichi growled out, tenderly rubbing her sore knuckles. Hitting Naruto's head bare-handed was about as intelligent as a civilian punching a slab of granite. She made a mental note to aim for the fleshier areas on his body that weren't covered by his golden armor. Speaking of which, why didn't you just go home and rest instead of sleeping outside? Naruto instantly looked off to the side with a strange look in his eyes that Karasu couldn't readily identify. After a couple moments of silence, he finally spoke up. I didn't want to spend any of my money on a hotel room, and I haven't gone by my parents' place yet. Your parents' place? Karasu repeated quietly in honest surprise, having always known Naruto as an orphan. Even after so long, she was still learning things about her childhood friend and rival. Naruto nodded slightly, the subject obviously being a sensitive subject for him, but he actually wanted to talk about it. He never kept secrets from her. Well, not very many, but if she asked the right questions in the right way, he would answer her honestly, and he sometimes dropped small hints for her to catch on to when it came to certain things. If there was one thing in the world that he hated the most and felt absolutely horrible about, it was keeping secrets from Karasu. Yeah, they died during the Kyuubi attack, the night I was born. As it was stated in their wills, their house and just about all of their belongings were part of my inheritance. Naruto mumbled quietly while Karasu waited for him to continue. I haven't gone by there yet. I don't think I'm ready to do that just yet. Do you at least know where it is? Karasu asked as an idea started forming in her mind. It had a strong chance of backfiring on her, but it needed to be done. Naruto nodded in response. Good, because we're going there, right now. What? No. Naruto protested, but Karasu was already grabbing his hands and in the process of pulling him to his feet. He didn't put up much of a fight. Then again, he was kind of scared of Karasu's Sharingan glares. You made me face the fact that my entire clan is gone and that killing my brother wouldn't bring them back. Karasu began firmly before her tone softened in the end as her fully matured Sharingan eyes faded away to reveal her usual onyx irises. It's your turn now. Naruto said nothing as he looked away, not really liking the idea of it, especially not around Karasu. Unlike her, he was an extremely emotional person. But she was just as stubborn as him and he knew she wouldn't let up until he gave in to her demands. Just like how he did the same thing for her when they first met. It was actually the main reason they became friends in the first place. Fine, come on. Thank you. The lone Uchiha returned appreciatively, confusing Naruto a little bit. I wasn't really looking forward to forcing you to go through with this. Unlike a certain someone I know. Yeah, whatever. The blonde mumbled quietly, blatantly ignoring the half-hearted pointed look she gave him as he started walking, hands stuffed in his pockets as he took the lead. Karasu frowned slightly from her spot a couple paces behind him. A depressed Naruto was not a good thing. It's one of the reasons why she wanted him to face his fears. The world just seemed a darker place when he wasn't his usual happy-go-lucky idiot self. Here it is, Naruto mumbled as they came to a stop. Despite having not been lived in for the past 16 years, Karasu actually thought the place looked rather cozy. It was about 4 or 5 acres of property tucked away in a semi-hidden wooded corner of the residential district with a simple 7-foot-high wall of white stone along the perimeter of the yard for privacy that was topped with brown clay tiles with an equally tall wooden double gate in the middle of the wall at the front of the property that had been painted tan, which they now stood on the other side of. Sitting in the approximate center of the property was the house in question. It was 2 stories, painted a plain off-white with plain brown roofing and trim. There was a small pond to the side in the front, a couple trees, and not much else that she could see at the moment. It could use a bit of work, but it's still a nice place. Karasu commented before starting to head towards the house, Naruto trailing a couple paces behind her. After unlocking the door, Naruto was the first to enter with Karasu following right behind him. While it was rather simple and unremarkable in appearance, she instantly noticed the feeling of home the place gave off the moment she stepped through the threshold. Oh, wow. It looks even nicer on the inside. The floors were all a polished dark brown hardwood, the walls a soft beige with dark brown wood trim accenting the interior along the walls and doorways. After a few minutes of exploring, they found that the second floor held 1 master bedroom with an attached master bathroom, 2 guest rooms, 1 regular bathroom, a study and what they guessed to be a small personal armory room of sorts, though it was bare of anything beyond basic supplies and equipment. The first floor held a kitchen that had plenty of room to work in while the dining room beside it was spacious with enough room for an 8-person table and still have a little extra room to spare. The den had plenty of space to entertain guests while the laundry room was located at the opposite end of the house. In the back, there was a well-made wooden deck that spanned the entire length of the house and stretched out a good 20 feet with a waist-high railing all along it, the roof extending to cover the entire deck. Beyond that, there wasn't much else worthy of noting. There was a rather large beige couch and a similarly colored recliner in the den with a low-lying coffee table next to them, a king-size bed in the master bedroom, and a couple other pieces of furniture scattered throughout the house, but not much else. There isn't much furniture, Karasu noted aloud, despite the fact being pretty obvious. According to the old man, my parents hadn't had the chance to fully move in when the Kyuubi attacked. Naruto answered softly, having spotted the boxes of his parents' belongings that had been stored in scrolls and placed in the master bedroom's spacious walk-in closet. The only reason the house was clean and the yard wasn't a veritable jungle by now was because of the Sandame having a genin team clean up the property under the guise of a D-rank mission. Still, it had been a couple months since the last time it had been taken care of, so a little work was in order later on. They had saved up their money for months to buy this place and were just starting to move out of their apartment and into here when. Come on, you can stay at my place for a couple days. Karasu suggested a few seconds after Naruto trailed off, realizing her plan wasn't exactly working, but Naruto shook his head and sighed heavily. No, you were right, Karasu. Naruto admitted as he took off his metal face mask and set it down on the kitchen counter that separated the kitchen from the den in the front. Pulling his cloth mask down around his neck, he closed his eyes while doing his best to keep calm. Whether I like it or not, it's my turn to face my fears. Well, then that settles it. Karasu stated firmly as she plopped down on the couch and threw her arms over the back of it. Naruto gave her a confused look and she smirked that smug smirk of hers. If you're staying here, then so am I. What? He exclaimed in shock. He did not recall agreeing to anything of the sort. Karasu scoffed and got a little more comfortable where she was. The couch was incredibly plush and comfy despite it being just about as old as she and Naruto were, if not older. Then again, it had gone unused for years and probably wasn't even the original couch that had been put in the house back when Naruto's parents were moving in. Baka. It's just for a night or two. She explained before her slight annoyance became well-hidden concern. Just until I'm sure you'll be okay on your own. Like how you did with me back then. That was a little different. Naruto mumbled while looking away, suddenly regretting taking his masks off since his slight blush was now in full view of the girl. He always got a little shy around the opposite gender whenever it came to living around them, no matter how temporary or short the duration was. Again, Karasu scoffed. Alright, so it wasn't, but still. It's not like when we were kids, Karasu. We can't exactly share a bed like we used to back then. Oh? Says who? Karasu teased, having always liked to get under Naruto's skin. It was just too fun and too easy for her. The blonde instantly went beet red and it took almost all of her willpower to keep her amusement hidden from him. You know what I mean. He practically yelled at her, obviously flustered by her teasing. He was starting to regret forcing her to gain a sense of humor back when they were kids. If there was one thing he was thankful for not getting from his sensei, it was Jiraiya's pervertedness. Then again, Karasu would have most likely killed him if he became anything like Jiraiya. That is, if Tsunade Ba-chan didn't get to him first. After calming down a little, Naruto rubbed the back of his head without making eye contact with Karasu. You can take the bed. I'll sleep on the couch. There is no way I'm going to let you sleep on the couch in your own house. She retorted firmly, her eyes narrowing slightly as her smirk disappeared. I'll take the couch. Like hell you are. Naruto grunted out, crossing his arms over his chest while raising an eyebrow at her with an equally blank expression on his face. Remember the last time you slept on a couch? You damn near bit everyone's head off the next morning, and you were only 9 years old. Seriously, grown adults were scared shitless of you that day. I wasn't that bad. Karasu grumbled while looking away, blushing a little herself. Then she realized that she had inadvertently managed to back Naruto into a corner and proceeded with teasing him again. Her blush disappeared and she smirked smugly once more. Well, I guess that leaves only one option for us, huh? Oh, fuck me. Naruto mumbled under his breath a moment later while palming his face, blushing heavily as he realized that Karasu had somehow brought them around full circle back to the topic of sharing a bed. Sorry, I'm not into dumbasses. Karasu joked, getting a strangled yell of aggravation from her childhood friend and rival, who was blushing even worse than before. She couldn't help it after that and broke out into stifled giggles, only for it to become full-blown laughter a moment later. It was just too much fun teasing him. It was also the first time she had had a good, honest laugh in years. Hold on a second, you mean to tell me that your father was the Yondaime Hokage? Karasu exclaimed in shock from her spot beside Naruto on the floor in the master bedroom, both having taken to looking through the contents of a couple of the storage scrolls that had been boxed up in the closet not long after getting some takeout for dinner. Currently held in her hands was a picture of the Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato, holding a red-haired woman that was obviously pretty far into her pregnancy with Naruto. Before said blonde could even respond, Karasu instantly punched him in his arm with a mock glare. Why the hell didn't you tell me before? I just found out a little while ago myself, okay? Naruto growled back while rubbing his bicep, suddenly regretting taking his armor off earlier. Karasu was always punching him or something along those lines whenever he either aggravated her or did something stupid. Thankfully, there had been an armor stand in the armory room that he was now putting to good use. Sensei told me about them last year on my 15th birthday, and believe me, Karasu, I would have told you the moment I found out if I could have. You know that. HMPH. She huffed out in mild irritation, but calmed back down nonetheless. Shortly after forcing Naruto to agree to let her stay for a few nights, Karasu had gone back to her apartment and grabbed a bag with a couple sets of clothes and other necessities she might need while staying over at his place. The last Uchiha in Konoha was currently clad in a pair of tight-fitting black short shorts and a black skin-tight underarmor top that left her midriff bare with a full-length left sleeve and no right sleeve. So, who was your mother? She's beautiful. Her name was Uzumaki Kushina, and that she was. Naruto answered with a small, but warm smile as he stared at the picture in her hands. He thought her choice in sleepwear was a bit unusual, the top specifically, but he wasn't about to question it, lest he suffer through another bout of her teasing. Or more of her punches. He himself was dressed simply in a simple pair of baggy black shorts he sometimes slept in and a black tank top, both trimmed in golden yellow. Sensei said that she was one of the kindest and most beautiful women he had ever met, but she had a really bad temper that got her the nickname, Red Hot-Blooded Habanero, back when she was just starting out at the academy. Turns out that she was bane of bullies. Really? Karasu mumbled thoughtfully while looking at the red-haired woman in the photo, thinking back on what Jiraiya had told her earlier that morning about Naruto's own temper. Setting the photo down, she picked up one of the storage scrolls and read the writing on it. I think I found one of your parents' jutsu scrolls, but there's a weird-looking seal on it that won't let me open it. That's because it's a blood seal. Naruto spoke up while taking the scroll from her. It's a special security seal that only lets certain people undo it by putting their blood on it and channeling chakra into it. Since the old man and sensei were the ones that packed up my parents' belongings, they probably designed the seal to register my blood only. Safety reasons and all that. That's kind of cool, actually. Karasu murmured with wide-eyed curiosity as she stared at the seal. It reminds me of the Uchiha clan archives. Some of the jutsu scrolls require the Sharingan to read them and some even require fully matured Sharingan eyes. Interesting. Naruto commented idly while setting the scroll aside to study later on when he had time. They were quiet for a few minutes after that as they sorted out certain scrolls from the others, such as scrolls that contained his parents' clothes from the few jutsu scrolls they had left behind, or dishes and other similar things sealed away for easy storage. It wasn't long before he noticed that Karasu was getting a little sluggish and lazy in her efforts to help him, the dark-haired kunoichi yawning tiredly. He wasn't surprised she was tired, it was a little after midnight already. He was surprised, however, when she started leaning against him a few minutes later, moments away from falling asleep completely. Blushing from the close contact, Naruto wanted desperately to pull away or make her go to bed, but she just looked too comfortable to disturb. Part of his mind was shell-shocked from how close she was. Another part was busy battling against the rare perverted thoughts floating through his head, and the rest just couldn't resist admiring how peaceful and beautiful she looked. Naruto's face instantly turned crimson at that thought, having never really thought of Karasu as just a girl, a rather attractive one, at that. She had always just been his friend and rival, sort of how a sibling would be, but he didn't know what it was that had changed. Maybe it was because of Jiraiya's perverted habits starting to rub off on him, maybe it was because he was going through puberty with the hormones and all. Or maybe it was because he wasn't the same oblivious idiot he used to be and was finally noticing things he never paid attention to before. This is SOOO not happening right now. Naruto mentally protested as he squeezed his eyes shut and tried to force the thoughts of Karasu being more than just his friend out of his head. That was when Karasu decided to wiggle her way under his arm and lean against him more fully with her arms loosely wrapped around his middle, her head leaning against his shoulder with her forehead pressed against the side of his neck. His eyes popped back open instantly while his blush increased several-fold. Karasu moaned out softly with the faintest of sleep smiles on her face as she nuzzled his shoulder, her body autonomously attempting to cuddle up against the source of intense warmth she was next to. Strangely, Naruto found himself calming back down a few moments later as he stared down at her, his body frozen in place as he tried to figure out what he should do. Seeing her look so Gentle made him smile a little bit, knowing it was her true self. After the massacre, Karasu had been in a very delicate state during the first couple days while recovering from the genjutsu her brother had cast on her. She had actually been rather nice, if not a bit arrogant, prior to that terrible night, but her mind had nearly collapsed on itself afterwards. From what she had told him and what he had read from the medical and psychiatric reports she had shown him, Karasu's demeanor would switch from angry and violent to severely depressed and potentially suicidal at varying degrees with little to no transfer between moods. It was sort of like someone repeatedly flicking a light switch on and off at random intervals. While she never admitted it to anyone or let it show in front of others, even Naruto, the blonde knew that after her mind had evened back out that she developed the usual cold, tomboyish, and sometimes aggressive demeanor she now had as a defense mechanism, a metaphorical shell to protect her true self from the outside world. In reality, Karasu was actually quite feminine and girly on the inside, but never really showed it, her darker side believing it to be a weakness, and she irrationally despised any weaknesses she may or may not have because of what her brother had done to her. The only times her true gentle self actually showed was whenever she was sleeping, as odd as it might seem, or whenever she was in the privacy of her own home where no one could see. Naruto stopped his internal psychoanalysis of his childhood friend and rival when Karasu's grip around his waist tightened a little bit, an almost unheard whimper escaping her from the possible beginnings of a bad dream. Sighing quietly, he finally relented. All right, I get it," he whispered quietly before adjusting their positions so that he could get his arms under her. Picking her up bridal style, Naruto stood up with Karasu tenderly cradled in his arms before gently laying her on the bed and pulling the covers over her, deciding to take advantage of the situation by silently slipping out of the room in search of a certain couch downstairs. However, he winced slightly and froze halfway to the door when he heard Karasu let out a quiet groan from her spot on the bed in her sleep. Sighing heavily and rubbing the back of his neck, Naruto let his shoulders sag with resignation before turning around and heading back to the bed, already pulling his tank top over his head and letting it drop to the floor. He simply couldn't let girls be in distress at any point, he was just too kind to do that. "You are not making a habit of this," Naruto mumbled under his breath as he slipped under the covers. Almost immediately, Karasu snuggled up against him, her head resting on his chest instead of the pillow with one arm draped across his stomach. Cheeks burning red, Naruto couldn't help feeling like a human space heater with how Karasu pressed herself flush against his side. Groaning quietly as she stretched a little bit, Karasu slowly opened her eyes and found herself alone in bed, something that kind of confused her. She didn't remember getting in bed last night, and if Naruto ended up chickening out and slept on the couch, she was going to punch him as hard she could. Sitting up and tucking her bangs behind her ears so they weren't in her face, she rubbed her eyes tiredly and yawned, stretching again. She didn't know if it was the bed or something else, but she felt more rested than she had ever been in years. Before she could do anything else, she caught a whiff of something cooking. Something that smelled delicious, almost as if she were sleepwalking. Karasu, uncaring of her messy and disheveled bed hair, didn't realize she was already halfway down the stairs a minute later until she heard the sound of dishes being set on the bar-like counter that divided it from the den. It was only then that she realized that Naruto was in the kitchen, cooking breakfast for them. "I didn't know he could cook," she thought idly before slipping into the tall chair that sat in front of the counter, something she didn't remember being there yesterday, but didn't pay it any attention. All of her focus was on the steamed rice, nori, and tamagoyaki that sat before her. Picking up her chopsticks and muttering a still sleepy, "Itadakimasu," Karasu lazily took a bite of her tamagoyaki first before starting to wolf down her meal seconds later. It was a rather common breakfast, but there was something about it that made her mouth water from the taste. She paused part way through, however, when she heard Naruto, fully outfitted in his armor with the exception of his mask, quietly laughing at her. She never even noticed when he had sat down beside her to eat his own breakfast. The lone Uchiha Kunoichi had the decency to blush a little, embarrassed by her sudden disregard for table manners. "I take it you like my cooking?" he teased lightly, getting a somewhat shy nod from her with a small sheepish smile on her face. Letting out another quiet chuckle, Naruto shook his head before taking another bite of his rice. "You should start getting ready after you're done eating. Team's assignments are today." Karasu merely nodded as she took another bite of her meal, trying to at least maintain some of her table manners despite how good Naruto's cooking was. "Oh, come on," Naruto complained loudly while covering his face with his hands, having just found out where he was ranked amongst the others in his class, the bottom of the list. Beside him, Karasu was torn between laughing at her friend's plight and trying to console him, but remained as detached as she normally was. Despite Naruto's overdramatic reaction, he knew the reason why he was ranked at the bottom was because he hadn't been present in the academy for so long. Thus, he had virtually no records of test scores or attendance, leaving him at the bottom of the list, and then he saw where Karasu was ranked. Jumping back and jabbing a finger at the list posted on the wall with the flames of outrage in his eyes, he continued with his overreactive behavior. "Ah, this is bullshit. How are you in first place and I'm in last? Because I'm that much better than you," Karasu teased, getting a fiery glare from the blonde beside her that made her smirk. "Why, jealous? HMPH. Naruto snorted while turning his back on her and marching off in the direction of the classroom they had to go to for team assignments, his armored hands stuffed in his pockets. Karasu stopped herself from laughing at his reaction and followed after him. After picking a spot in the back of the class, Karasu would quietly poke fun at Naruto merely for her own amusement, the blonde grumbling under his breath and throwing the occasional sarcastic barb or half-hearted glare her way every once in a while. Neither of them really paid attention to Iruka as he gave a brief speech before listing the teams, not until they heard their names, at least. Team 7 will be comprised of Uchiha Karasu. Iruka started, Naruto and Karasu listening closely the moment Karasu's name came out of his mouth. Sai, and Haruno Sakura. "Oh, fuck, not her." Karasu groaned under her breath as she covered her face with one hand and let her head hang, her reaction confusing Naruto greatly. Seeing the look he was giving her, she decided to fill him in. "Sakura is batshit insane. Really? She couldn't be that bad," Naruto mumbled before Karasu discreetly pointed over towards the girl in question. His opinion started leaning in the same direction Karasu's did a moment later. Sakura was about 5 feet 3 inches with about the same general figure as Karasu, only a little more athletic. Her skin was lightly tanned, her waist-length hair was bubblegum pink and styled in an undershave that had been pulled back and twisted into a thin braid, and her eyes were cold emeralds that stared at everything with the same look of bored apathy. 4 parallel scars ran along the top left side of her head from just above her left temple towards the back of her head, while a couple other scars crisscrossed what was visible of her upper arms, but Naruto didn't doubt that there were more that they couldn't see. She was dressed in a dark crimson skin-tight sleeveless leotard with a turtleneck collar that had black along the sides and a white ring decorating the back of it, baggy black pants hanging off her hips with the black strip of cloth from her Konoha Hite aid acting as a belt for them, with the leggings tucked into heavy-looking black knee-high combat boots that bore polished steel over the toes and heels, black bicep-high gloves on her arms with light gray Enbu-style bracers strapped to her forearms, and an unzipped dark crimson short-sleeved body-hugging hoodie with black fur lining and white rings decorating the sleeves halfway down her upper arms. Strapped to the side of either thigh were 3 kunai pouches, while a basic equipment pouch sat behind either of her hips, a satchel-like equipment pouch situated between them along the back of her waist. At the moment, she had her feet kicked up on the desk in front of her and her arms crossed over her modest B-cup chest. At first, he figured she was just the antisocial type, up until one of the other students tried to sit down in the empty seat beside her. Without even glancing at them, she kicked the chair they were about to sit in, moving it over just enough for the other genin to miss the chair completely and fall to the ground. When the genin went to complain, Sakura, literally, growled at the poor boy as if she were a rabid dog. The kid couldn't get away from her fast enough. "Okay, maybe you're right," Naruto mumbled quietly and a little uneasily. Not only was he not teamed up with his childhood friend and rival, but said rival was on the same team as the resident psychopath. And were those fangs he saw a moment ago? That was when he realized that he hadn't heard his name get called yet, and Iruka had already put away the list of genin teams. "Now that is out of the way, Naruto-san?" Iruka commented before calling out, catching the blonde's attention before Naruto could start worrying or freaking out. "Hokage-sama wanted to speak with you after team assignments." "Oh, okay," the blonde mumbled, feeling a little numb while Karasu watched him get up and leave, her concern for him showing clearly in her onyx eyes. You wanted to see me, Hokage-sama? Naruto inquired softly as he entered the Hokage's office, numbly sitting down in one of the chairs set before the elderly ninja's desk. The Sandaime could only stare at the blonde with a hint of guilt, being the cause of Naruto's depressive state, but he could only hope his plan worked out in the end. Yes, Naruto-kun, as you've probably figured out, you weren't placed on a genin team. I apologize about that, but you were a late enrollee. Not even I can circumvent the rules when it comes to the academy. The Sandaime began to explain, mentally wincing when he noticed that it was doing nothing for the boy's mood. However, I did find a couple loopholes and pulled what few strings I could. What do you mean, Hokage-sama? Naruto questioned curiously, tilting his head slightly with mildly narrowed eyes. This time, Hiruzen couldn't help grinning slightly. Well, while you can't be placed on a 3-unit genin team like the other new graduates due to the uneven numbers, there are still a few options left for you. The wizened professor couldn't stop himself from smiling a little more as the light started returning to Naruto's eyes, the teen seeming more like himself with every new bit of information. As of right now, you have 3 options to choose from, each having their own benefits and consequences. The first of them is to join an already existing team that is short 1 member. It would be considered a transfer, meaning the team as a whole would be denied the chance to participate in the Chunin exams that Konoha will be hosting later this year, along with barring the team from taking on certain kinds of missions for a while. However, you would potentially become friends with the other Genin and Junin sensei that would be on the team and learn quite a bit from each of them, if not teach them a few things. Your second option is to undergo an apprenticeship under a Junin that would be willing to teach you directly and individually. But there are few that are willing to take on a single student and fewer still that are available. And the third option? Naruto questioned curiously, already thinking over what he could do. Unlike the other 2 options, the third one has the greatest drawbacks to it. You would be given the special designation as a Tokubetsu Genin and made a 1-unit team, meaning you would not have teammates to rely on and you would not have a Junin instructor to guide you or teach you anything. You would have to be entirely self-sufficient both in your training and during missions. Normally, I wouldn't even allow it to be an available option, but after your encounter with Mizuki the other night, I am willing to make an exception just this one time. Hiruzen explained, but the revelation was a half-truth. The true second half of his reason for allowing the chance to become a solo operating genin was because of the reports Jiraiya had sent him in the past concerning Naruto's skills. If you choose to become a Tokubetsu genin, you would have to undertake a higher amount of missions between now and the Chunin exams if you wish to enter. You would have to attend and sometimes participate in certain meetings that would relate to genin teams and such. And you would have to undertake the responsibilities the Junin sensei would normally have, such as turning in written mission reports as well as verbal reports, filing team-related forms for certain events, and the like. Since the village's founding, Konoha has had only 12 Tokubetsu Genin, with only 6 making it to Chunin and only one of those 6 ever making it to Junin. Naruto was silent for several minutes as he contemplated his options, his gaze turned downward and not really focusing on anything in particular as he weighed the pros and cons of each choice. Joining a genin team would give him the chance to make friends and learn more about the ninja arts, but would delay him and the others from getting a promotion or at least trying to obtain said promotion. Becoming an apprentice to a Junin would put him on the fast track to getting stronger since he would be receiving direct training from the Junin, but there weren't very many that were able to take on an apprentice or even want one, so there was the risk of the Junin that takes him on being unable to help him in his own specializations and such. Becoming a Tokubetsu Genin would leave him on his own with no one to teach him and no teammates for backup should he be out in the field. But he was a powerhouse and he knew it. Not even counting the Kyuubi's chakra, Naruto had more chakra than most Junin. Even though his control over that chakra was worrying at times, his base physical strength was nearly 5 times the average of other ninja, and he was no stranger to being outnumbered and outmatched in a fight, so it wouldn't be too different than what he was used to. Not only that, but he had a decent self-healing ability from both his Uzumaki heritage and the Kyuubi's presence inside of him. He had above-average knowledge of advanced Fuinjutsu, a decent ninjutsu arsenal that was a little too destructive to use around others, had been taught Senju Tsunade's strength enhancement technique by the woman herself, and could spam Kage Bunshin all day long in hordes. Plus, he still had his parents' jutsu scrolls to look through and learn from. You know, old man. Naruto started while looking up at the Sandaime, a mischievous glint shining in his eyes that made it obvious to Hiruzen that Naruto was grinning impishly under his mask. I always did like a challenge. Now, what do I have to sign to become a Tokubetsu Genin? Later that afternoon, Karasu trudged into Naruto's home a bit irritably. First, Kakashi was late by 2 hours, like he always was. Then Sai started cracking stupid jokes about her and Sakura being fat. And then after the two kunoichi beat the shit out of him, Sakura decided to turn around and make a snide comment about her flat-ish chest. It had been one long and aggravating afternoon with her team, which would be made official if they could pass Kakashi's stupid little test tomorrow. Thinking of teams, Karasu's mind switched over to her blonde friend and her irritation instantly flipped over to concern for Naruto, having seen the look in his eyes. It wasn't as bad as when they first came to the house he now lived in, but she still saw it. He was getting depressed again. Before she was even halfway to the shower, Karasu turned on her heel and started searching through the house for him, but found no sign of him even having come back. Damn it, Naruto, where the hell are you? Karasu muttered to herself worriedly while moving for the front door, only to spot something on the kitchen's bar counter, a note. Picking it up, she absently read it out loud. Won't be back until late tonight. Left some takeout in the fridge for you. Naruto, Baka. Unknown to her, Naruto was using one of the training fields along the edge of the village. Shadow clones were scattered everywhere, most working on chakra control exercises or studying some of his parents' scrolls while he and a clone sparred using taijutsu only. His eyes, mirrored by each of his clones, were narrowed slightly and cold, his mind focused entirely on getting stronger. He had been honest when he said he liked a challenge, having always had a knack for proving people wrong and doing the impossible. But even Naruto knew not to fool around now that he was a Tokubetsu Genin. He was going to be facing far tougher challenges ahead of him than any of the others that graduated from his class, and even more still, he was not going to let those challenges crush him under their weight. With his indomitable stamina and massive chakra reserves, the momentum he had already built up in his training so far would undoubtedly carry him on through the night, at least until dawn. It wouldn't be the first time he had done it and most definitely wouldn't be the last. TCH. Naruto scoffed slightly as he and his clone locked hands again, both blondes glaring into each other's eyes as their foreheads touched, pushing back against each other with everything they had while anchoring themselves to the ground with chakra. Not just that, but they both amplified their already incredible strength with chakra as well, the amount of pressure they were exerting on the other being enough to crush diamonds into powder between their armored palms, yet neither one budged. While rather lacking in actual fighting, the deadlock had drawn the attention of some of the other clones, mostly those busy with chakra control exercises. Being a sensor-type shinobi, though not a very good one yet, Naruto's clones were as well, and they could feel their chakras clashing, trying to overwhelm the other through sheer brute force. Grinning wolfishly and viciously beneath his armored mask just as he was sure his clone was doing as well, Naruto was glad that he overpowered the shadow clone he was locked with, having actually put a little over half of his remaining chakra reserves into the clone to make sure it lasted longer than normal since his chakra replenished itself rather quickly. Even still, Naruto was letting some of his chakra soak into the clone while they had direct contact with each other to make sure it didn't pop prematurely. He was simply having way too much fun at the moment to let the clone dispel before he was done. He better not have done something stupid again. Karasu mumbled quietly as she wondered what became of Naruto for what felt like the 1000th time. It had been almost a month already and she hadn't seen even a glimpse of him. Neither had anyone else from their graduation class, but then again, he didn't really know anyone when he came back to Konoha that still remembered him or anything. Then there were a few that used misdirection instead of giving her a straightforward answer. The main one was the Sandaime Hokage, who seemed to enjoy watching her freak out every few days because she couldn't find Naruto. What really messed with her head was the fact that every morning when she'd get up or when she'd come home from training or doing missions with her team, there would be a note from Naruto on the kitchen counter for her in her own apartment, having moved back to her own place a couple days after Naruto seemingly disappeared. Most of the time, it was paired with some form of takeout or home-cooked meal Naruto had made for her, the blonde knowing she had almost no talent in cooking and was more likely to set her kitchen on fire than prepare an edible meal for herself. "Did you say something, Tidless?" Sai questioned from her right, only for the Uchiha to punch him as hard as she could. Sakura busting out in hysterical laughter a second later while Karasu's face was flushed bright scarlet from rage and embarrassment. Her chest size turned out to be a very touchy subject for her. She had long since stopped yelling at the creepy teen and now resorted to simply hitting him in order to get him to shut up, much to Sakura's amusement. She was not happy about her team. Hey, calm down, you three. We're almost there, so behave yourselves. Kakashi chastised lazily from behind the three genin as they neared the administrative building for another D-rank mission, never taking his eyes off the pages of his book. Turning the last corner, the building was within sight, and that was when Karasu spotted her wayward rival for the first time in a month. He was standing out in front of the administrative building with someone else, a man Kakashi recognized as a fellow Junin that had just earned his rank a couple years ago and was currently the leading Raiden user and one of the fastest Junin in Konoha, Guhu Arashi. Rumor had it that the man was thinking of taking on a genin squad come the next batch of academy graduates. Arashi was about 23 and stood at an even 6 feet with medium-length shaggy black hair and bright electric blue eyes. He had a very noble and handsome facial structure that made many females swoon, while a scar crossed over the end of his right eyebrow at an angle from just above his brow to just above his right cheekbone. But his gaze and facial expression was cold and apathetic, often spooking and unnerving others more than anything. He held a slim and lean athletic build and wore the basic Junin uniform with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows and black fingerless gloves on his hands that had a silver metal plate covering the knuckles that had 4 flat rounded studs running across it, while a metal plate covered the back of either hand with Konoha's stylized leaf symbol engraved on them. "Arigato, Arashi-san." Naruto spoke up with an eye smile as he took the scroll Arashi was handing him. A moment later, the golden-armored blonde turned and jumped to the roof of a nearby building, seemingly oblivious to Team 7's approach. Noticing them, Arashi glanced over and spotted the 3 genin and their sensei as they neared. Good afternoon, Hitaki-senpai. The blue-eyed Junin greeted stoically, bowing slightly out of respect for the man that helped him train his lightning affinity during his days as a rookie Chunin. What did Naruto want? Karasu questioned bluntly, giving the dark-haired Junin a steely stare that actually impressed Konoha's lightning bolt a little. Show a little respect, Karasu. Kakashi admonished lightly before looking Arashi and showing a little more tact than his student, knowing about the golden-armored blonde. It always became village-wide news when a Tokubetsu genin joined Konoha's active duty ranks. Good afternoon, Arashi-san. How has Naruto been handling his new responsibilities? He has actually been quite busy, but he seems to be doing better than most others would. I think it helps that he apparently doesn't have a limit to the number of Kage Bunshin he can create. Arashi responded, the Junin's conversation confusing the 3 genin present a little, but Karasu was the most confused. Responsibilities? What do you mean? She inquired, glancing between the 2 Junin suspiciously. You don't know, do you? Arashi asked rhetorically while looking to the Uchiha Kunoichi. Naruto-san was given the rare opportunity to become a Tokubetsu genin, a 1-unit team without teammates or a Junin sensei. It is also one of the most difficult rankings to have. His responsibilities don't just include training himself and doing missions, but also the responsibilities the Junin sensei would have, such as meetings related to the genin teams that the Junin sensei would have to attend, along with the paperwork they would have to fill out and other similar things. Prior to Naruto-san, Konoha has had only 12 Tokubetsu genin since the village's founding. Only half of them ever made it to Chunin, and only one of those 6 ever made it to Junin. Naruto-san makes Konoha's 13th Tokubetsu genin. To put it in simpler terms, he was essentially promoted to Chunin prematurely with limited prival edges and a slightly more difficult workload. Where he goes from here rests entirely on his shoulders. Tokubetsu genin? Karasu mumbled uncertainly, having never heard of it before. Just what has her rival gotten himself into this time? Oh, there it is. Naruto mumbled to himself quietly as he picked out the file he was looking for and started glancing through its contents. It was the file on himself, though classified as Team 0 due to regulations concerning Tokubetsu genin. Pulling a simple pen out from one of his equipment pouches, Naruto added in the new information he needed to. Number of completed missions, mission ranks, payment amount for each mission completed, mission objectives, a summarized report of each new mission, the necessary time and date for each new mission being added to his file, and so on. Unlike other Junin instructors that didn't update their team's file until the end of each week, Naruto updated his after he was finished with doing his D-rank missions that same day, but he had forgotten to do it yesterday, so he figured he'd do it before going to see the Hokage. It was only then that he took notice of just how many D-rank missions he had done in the past month alone. 14 already? He wondered with mild surprise, having not really paid attention to the exact number of missions he had been taking on and completing. Then again, he had been using Kage Bunshin to take care of them a couple times each week and having them update the file themselves before dispelling. Most of the time, he was either busy with his responsibilities as the sole member of Team Zero, in a meeting of some kind, or training. According to the rules, the standard Genin team only had to do 6 D-rank missions, per Genin member, to qualify for a nomination to enter the Chunin exams, while Tokubetsu had to cover for each of the missing team members, meaning he had to get a total of 18 D-rank missions to qualify to nominate himself. He could just have a couple clones finish off the last 4 D ranks he needed and spend the rest of the time training for the exams or taking on higher-ranking missions to gain more experience in actual combat, so long as the Hokage allowed it. Finishing up with what he was doing, Naruto put the file back in its rightful place and left the Department of Records, deciding to go speak with the Sandaime about possibly taking on a C-rank mission. The journey wasn't long and he wasn't in a hurry, so he decided to simply walk to the Hokage's office, his armor-plated hands stuffed in his pockets. He was kind of glad no one had recognized just who he really was yet, but a little depressed by it all the same. Sure, he didn't have to deal with everyone glaring at him or whispering behind his back, but now he was just another person on the street. Even those that knew him prior to his trip with Jiraiya that didn't treat him as if he was lower than dirt didn't recognize him. None of them didn't even recognize his name, but then again, most of his old haters only knew him by his whiskered cheeks. "Ohayo, Naruto-kun," greeted the kind and warm voice of a kunoichi he had come to know rather well in the past month, Hyuga Asahi, Junin. Her smile went from a warm and tender greeting to mildly sheepish and a bit nervous. "You are the real one, right?" "Yes, Asahi-san," Naruto replied, laughing quietly with an eye smile. She had a tendency to start conversations with his clones, thinking she was talking to the original. "I'm the real one this time." Asahi, only 20 years old, stood at about 5 feet 7 inches with silky raven black waist-length hair bound near the end with a white hairband covered in thick snowy white faux fur, her skin the usual soft cream-colored complexion most Hyuga naturally possessed. She was dressed in a lavender knee-length battle dress with a slit running up the front of her right thigh for more freedom of movement with mesh straps that continued along the low-cut collar to hint at some of her C-cup cleavage, a pair of mesh shorts under her skirt, an odd dark indigo-purple leather armor-like piece that covered her back and attached to her battle dress just in front of her shoulders as well as at either side of her slim waist with snowy white faux fur along the edges over her shoulders and all the way around her waist. A royal purple waist cape situated around her waist that reached down just past her knees at a triangular cut with a split tail at the end. A single fingerless mesh glove on her right hand. Black knee-high open-toe kunoichi boots on her feet with a slightly thicker heel that gave her an addition 2 inches in height. A pair of kunai pouches strapped to the side of her right thigh under the skirt of her battle dress. And her konoha hite tied around her neck on a strip of black cloth. "Oh, thank goodness." She sighed in relief with her gloved hand on her chest, eyes closed serenely with a soft smile. Looking back to the armored blonde, Asahi shot him a beaming grin. He would never openly admit it himself, but in Naruto's and many other men's opinions, she had a smile that was just as beautiful as her namesake, Morning Sun. "I just happened to see you leaving the Department of Records and decided to say hi. You know, you're becoming quite the workaholic, Naruto-kun. You need to relax a little bit and not rush into everything all the time." "Yeah, I have been running myself a bit ragged, haven't I?" Naruto agreed with a sheepish eye smile, rubbing the back of his head slightly. "I guess I got kind of excited about doing everything on my own from the start and just got used to being so busy all the time." "Don't we all?" the Hyuga kunoichi remarked playfully, having been about the same way when she was first promoted to Junin at the age of 17. Back when the academy graduation age was still 12 instead of 16 like it was now. "So, where were you off to? Since you're not running around like usual, I'm guessing you're not that busy today?" Yeah, I was already thinking about taking it a little easy today, but I wanted to ask the Hokage about possibly getting a C-rank mission to add to my file. Naruto answered, surprising the Junin a little. Oh, already going for higher-ranking missions, eh? Seems like someone's pretty confident in themselves. Asahi teased lightly. Due to his armored mask, she never saw Naruto's embarrassed blush, but his eyes smiled nonetheless. Just remember what I said earlier, don't push yourself so hard. I had to get going, so I'll talk to you some other time, Naruto-kun. Alright, until next time, Asahi-san. The blonde returned in departing, the Hyuga woman taking to the rooftops once more. Rubbing the back of his head as he slouched, Naruto let out a heavy sigh of relief. Even after a month of almost daily small-talk conversations with her, either in person or accidentally through clones, he still wasn't entirely comfortable around women. The only reason he didn't act shy or started blushing up a storm or anything was because of being around Jiraiya for so long, the perverted old hermit. Taking after Asahi's example, Naruto simply decided to avoid any more distracting thoughts and took to the rooftops, continuing on his journey to visit the Hokage. Only a couple minutes later, he was standing before the door to the Sandaime Hokage's office, knocking 3 times a moment later. "Come in," the lone occupant of the room called out from within. Stepping inside, Naruto watched as the Sandaime glanced up at him and smiled brightly, obviously happy for the distraction from his paperwork. But the blonde still caught the look in the elderly man's eyes. He was thinking about something and it wasn't good. "Ah, Naruto-kun, what can I do for you? I was wondering if there was any chance I could get a C-rank mission." Naruto answered as he came to a stop in front of the man's desk. "It would give me some experience in actual combat to help buffer my skills." "Ah, I see," Hiruzen mumbled as his smile faltered slightly. He had been expecting it eventually, but he still didn't like the idea of it. Sure, the boy was strong, much stronger than most others in his generation, but the Sandaime still thought of Naruto as a grandson. As such, he felt responsible for him and defaulted to semi-protective tendencies on occasion. At the moment, however, he wasn't going to stand in his way. "I have 2 C ranks available right now. One is an escort mission to Wave Country and the other is to investigate a clan-owned village in Forest Country." Naruto hummed quietly and thought, scratching the back of his head slightly. Considering it was an escort mission, he'd probably get at least a good fight or 2 from some bandits on the Wave Country mission, but he wasn't very fond of the ocean and all. Plus, he had been to Forest Country once before during his travels with Jiraiya and knew the land there a little better. He sighed and shrugged slightly. "I guess I'll go to Forest Country. Anything I need to know?" I had been in contact with the leader of the Akaju clan for the past few weeks. Apparently, a large number of bandits had been harassing them recently and the Akaju clan leader was requesting some assistance with them. Hiruzen began while passing Naruto the mission scroll for him to review. "And then I never heard from them again. I was already planning on sending someone to investigate, but most of the ones I wanted to send have been busy elsewhere." "I won't let you down, old man," Naruto remarked, already turning around to leave the office while waving over his shoulder. Once he was past the door, he was already making a shadow clone to sign the mission off as taken with the Hokage's secretary. A minute later, he stopped by his home to make sure he was well equipped for the mission ahead. Keeping his supplies in storage scrolls made things a lot easier when it came to packing, keeping non-combat equipment stored in the middle 2 pouches behind his waist while any weapons and combat-oriented items were kept in the 2 directly behind his hips. He also took a moment to adjust the scrolls hanging from his belt at his hips, each one being last resorts for him should things get too dangerous. Grabbing one last item, Naruto smirked slightly under his mask, an old somewhat tattered and torn baggy black hooded poncho he used to wear in order to hide his shiny golden armor. Throwing it on as he left his home with his long ponytail pulled forward over his right shoulder and loosely coiled around his neck, Naruto made a beeline straight for Konoha's west gate, reaching it in record time in his excitement about getting out of Konoha again. He honestly missed traveling like he used to. After signing out at the gate, Naruto took to the trees almost immediately and adjusting his course to the north in the direction of Forest Country. Since it was still about mid to late morning, he figured he could reach the border by nightfall, rest for the night, then reach Akaju village by around mid-morning if he left camp by sunrise. Without anyone to take the night watch, he was going to have to get creative with his kage bunshin. one thing after another. The blonde sighed while leaping from the latest branch he landed on. Okay, I shouldn't be that much further from Akaju village. It should be. Naruto mumbled quietly to himself while looking at the map that was with the mission scroll the Sandame had given him. It took a minute, but he put his finger to one spot. Here, only 2 kilometers from here? Should only take a couple minutes then. Shut the fuck up. Kyuubi suddenly roared from within Naruto's mind, spooking the blonde and nearly making him fall from the branch he was crouched on. Struggling to keep his balance while trying not to drop the map, the fist-sized canteen he was drinking from, or the rather tasty protein bar he had been snacking on. After rebalancing himself, Naruto huffed irritably. You nearly made me fall, Kitsune Teme. Naruto mentally snapped in response, getting a sound crossed between an annoyed growl and an amused chuckle from the biju sealed inside of him. Do you really need to be so loud? If it'll make you shut up and stop talking to yourself so much, then yes, I do. The nine-tailed fox snarled back. Naruto scoffed out loud as he finished his protein bar and took another sip of his canteen before putting it away. You really need to chill out, furball. Naruto finally replied before temporarily cutting off the mental link as he folded his map up and stuffed it in one of his equipment pouches. Jumping to another branch, Naruto made his way to his chosen destination, but as he drew closer, he caught a scent on the wind, one that unsettled him, smoke and blood. Eyes narrowing dangerously, Naruto pushed himself to move faster, his hands clenching into tight fists. Reaching the tree line, Naruto paused on the last branch in his path in a crouch, staring out at what remained of Akaju village, his eyes wide with shock. It was almost completely burned to the ground, most likely just a few days ago since there wasn't much smoke from the few smoldering remains of homes and other small buildings. Jumping down and running into the razed village, Naruto formed a couple shadow clones before they scattered, checking the village for survivors. It wasn't very big, probably housing only about a couple hundred people at most. Even still, Naruto didn't find any bodies, but it didn't help boost his confidence that the Akaju clan survived. The lingering stench of blood was still heavy, the packed soil roads cutting through the small village being stained with that same blood under the layer of ash, soot, and charred wood that choked them. That was when one of his clones dispelled, but unwillingly and without warning. Eyes narrowing as his fists clenched tight again, Naruto concentrated for a moment and scanned the area with his chakra sensing ability, locating the new arrival just as the second and third clones were forcefully dispelled within a minute of each other, all without alerting his clones to their presence prior to attacking them. Whoever they are, they're pretty sneaky and fast, Naruto thought to himself while standing out in the open in the middle of the village's main road. It was only a couple minutes before he felt the chakra signature rushing him from behind. Reacting at the last second, Naruto spun around and pinned the person's right leg against his side with his left arm just as they tried to kick him in the back, his right hand wrapping around their throat as he completed a full rotation with his attacker in his grip, slamming them back first into the ground directly in front of him. His eyes instantly widened, spotting the identifying markings of an Akaju, according to the details in the mission scroll. The young woman, probably around his age from the look of her, was roughly 5 feet 6 inches in height with a lithe and athletic, if not a bit voluptuous, hourglass figure. Her shaggy, almost knee-length hair was a distinct dark crimson streaked with bits of dark black in some areas and along the tips of her slicked back bangs with a large teal-colored metal bead of sorts holding her hair together near the end. Her feral-looking eyes were a startlingly bright teal color with black slit pupils, natural dark red eyeshadow lining them along the top and corners. Her fingers were tipped with short claw-like nails that she kept painted black and he could only assume she had 4 sharp fang-like canine teeth in her mouth. Either way, she was definitely an Akaju. She was dressed in a pair of slightly baggy black pants with slit-like openings at the sides of her broad hips that showed off the outer sides of her toned thighs while the leggings were taped down with black cloth from her knees down to her ankles. Black tabby socks covered her feet with dark crimson waraji for footwear. Dark crimson greaves were strapped to her shins and the tops of her feet. A very tight-fitting midriff-bearing black sleeveless turtleneck top covered the upper half of her torso with a diamond-shaped cutout in the middle of her chest to show off the cleavage of her admittedly large E-cup ass while her flat and toned stomach was left bare. A thin dark crimson sash was wrapped tightly around her slim waist, Black fingerless bicep-high gloves covered her arms with a dark crimson leather band cinched halfway up either of her biceps to hold them in place. Dark crimson bracers strapped to her forearms and the back of her hands with 3 dark crimson metal claws extending from the plate on the back of either of her hands between her knuckles with the middle claw on either bracer being the longest of them. And a black scarf wrapped around her neck and lower half of her face like a mask. "Yura!" The woman roared defiantly a second later as she recovered from the mildly stunning impact, swinging her right claws at Naruto's face at the same time. Eyes going wide, Naruto was forced to let her go and lean back to avoid losing an eye. Unfortunately, that was what the woman was hoping for. Left leg still extended upward from the blonde's hold on her, she twisted her body and rolled on her shoulder before sweeping Naruto's legs out from under him, flooring the cloaked Tokubetsu genin and leaving him lying on his back. Before he could get back up, the woman was on top of him. Literally, straddling his chest with her knees on his biceps, she cocked her right fist back as if to spear her claws through his eyes and forehead, her left hand braced against his chest at the base of his neck. Instead, she paused, glaring venomously at him. "Who are you? Come to finish me off like you bastards did with the rest of my village?" "Wah no," Naruto shot back, a little nervous at the moment. It was mostly because of the really pointy and deadly claws aimed to stab him in the face at the moment. Then again, he should have been a little smarter about everything. The young woman, obviously one of the Akaju clan's few ninja, was feeling about like Karasu did after the destruction of her clan, scared, angry, vengeful. He probably shouldn't have reacted with violence like he had, but it wasn't like she gave him much of a choice or any real reason not to beforehand. "I'm from Konoha. I was sent to check on your clan after we lost contact with you, damn it." She only narrowed her eyes, obviously not very trusting of anyone at the moment. Sighing heavily in exasperation, Naruto closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the ground. "My hite-ate's around my waist. The mission scroll is in an equipment pouch on my lower back, the one to the right of my spine. It's the tan and green scroll." He sighed out begrudgingly. Her eyes narrowed a little more. "Move and I'll kill you before you can even blink." She hissed at him before getting off his chest, glancing back and forth from his face to his poncho with the claws on her right hand held at Naruto's throat, checking under his poncho with her left hand. Seeing the stylized leaf symbol of Konoha on the hite-ate situated around his waist, just like he said, she risked relaxing a little bit, but kept her claws where they were. She then prodded his armored cheek with her claws. "Roll over. Slowly. Geez. Bossy, much?" Naruto grumbled under his breath while doing as instructed, but it only made the woman drop her knee into his back, coaxing out a slight grunt of pain from the blonde. All right, I get it, no more backtalk." The woman was quiet for a couple minutes as she rummaged through the equipment pouch Naruto had mentioned before finding the proper scroll, glancing through it a moment later. She then glanced at the back of Naruto's hooded head, her knee still pressing into his back. "You, really are from Konoha? That's what I said a minute ago, gah. Quit doing that," Naruto remarked sarcastically with a roll of his eyes, only for the Akaju woman to put more weight on her knee, getting a growl of irritation from the blonde for her efforts. A moment later, she stood up and, by absorbing the small amount of chakra in her bracers, retracted her blade-like claws, the scarlet talons disappearing as if they never existed to begin with. "Can I get up now?" "Yeah," she mumbled before helping him to his feet. Dusting himself off, Naruto sighed before holding his hand out, the woman handing the scroll back to him. Although he had been a little irritated with the rough treatment, Naruto was instantly drawn in when he saw the anger in the woman's eyes give way to sorrow and pain, but she did well not to let it take over completely. "I'm Benihime, by the way. Akaju Benihime, Uzumaki Naruto," Naruto replied, holding his hand out to her politely despite the slight sarcastic barb he threw in a moment later. "Pleased to meet you. Sorry for attacking you like that." Benihime mumbled apologetically as she shook his hand briefly, the blonde letting go of his irritation almost immediately after. "I thought you were one of the people that attacked my clan." "No, it's okay. I understand. A friend of mine went through something similar back when we were kids." Naruto consoled and admitted, putting a hand on the red-haired woman's shoulder comfortingly. It seemed to make something click in her head, however, as the restraint she showed was suddenly gone. Eyes going wide, Naruto could only stare down at the young woman as she practically tackled him, holding him as tight as she could while strangled sobs rocked her body with her face buried against his chest. Eyes softening, Naruto slowly and hesitantly wrapped his arms around the grief-stricken Akaju Kunoichi, holding her close as he closed his eyes and soothingly rubbed her back. "It's okay now. You're safe. Let it all out." Beniheim's sobs only got louder and her grip on him tightened, but neither bothered him. A small, sad smile formed on his face under his mask as he held the distraught Kunoichi, already knowing that they were going to be standing there for quite a bit. "So, you said there were missing men with the bandits?" Naruto inquired as it neared mid-afternoon, having let Benihime cry as much as she wanted earlier. Now, he was searching for any kind of clues that could lead him in the right direction as to where the bandits had gone. Scattered throughout the area were about a dozen of his shadow clones doing the same thing, but he kept Benihime with him so that he could talk to her more. "Yeah, there were. Only 2 in the attack, I think," she answered while crouching down and sifting through the ashes of burned-down home. It was the lone Hite-8 in her clan, one worn only by the clan head. It was a piece of dark red metal that covered the forehead with 2 dark red Oni-style horns on it and a set of 4 stylized fangs carved into the middle of it, 2 pointing down and 2 pointing up like the canine fangs of a snarling predatory animal. It should have had a strip of black cloth attached to it, but considering the fires the bandits had set to almost all of the buildings in the village, she wasn't surprised that the cloth was burned to ash and there were some scorch marks on the metal. She bit down on her bottom lip, choking down a sob that wanted to escape her. It had been her father's. Now, it was hers. "Any idea where they were from?" Naruto inquired before glancing over at her and noticing the fresh tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Walking over to her and crouching down beside her, Naruto put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you going to be okay, Benihime?" "Huh? Why yeah," she responded while looking away stubbornly, hastily drying her eyes to keep him from seeing her cry. Taking a deep breath to calm back down, Benihime stuffed the Hite-8 plate into the equipment pouch behind her left hip and stood up, stepping out of the burnt-down home for a breath of fresh air with Naruto following her out. I didn't get a good look at them. My father told me to stay out of the fight and hide. I didn't leave the clan's scroll vault until the next morning. Again, I'm sorry for bringing up any bad memories." Naruto apologized. "Do you happen to know which direction they went when they left or where they came from when they attacked?" I think they came from the northeast," she answered hesitantly after a few seconds of hard thought. Pulling out his map, Naruto examined the topographical details in the direction Benihime had said. That had put them pretty close to the rice country border. He mumbled quietly to himself while tapping the map since there was a valley that cut through forest country in the direction of rice country with only a couple spots that let someone cross it without worrying about the sheer 100-foot cliffs on either side of it. Just north of the valley, however, was mostly heavily wooded foothills all the way to forest country's eastern shores. He'll send out a few shadow clones to scout ahead later on so they don't end up going the wrong direction and wasting energy if and when they go to track the bandits down. Glancing at her out of the corner of his eye as he put his map away, Naruto noticed the sadness was showing more clearly in her eyes again. He needed to keep her talking. "If you don't mind me asking, what did your clan specialize in?" "Oh, tracking and beast taming, mostly." Benihime responded numbly, still having trouble thinking clearly, but it was understandable due to what she had gone through recently. Hearing the second part, Naruto gave her a look of surprised confusion, so she decided to elaborate, grateful for the distraction. "Using certain clan techniques, we could cast special genjutsu on animals that let us control them to a certain degree. After the genjutsu wears off, however, they revert back to their base nature as if nothing had changed. Some of my clan's beastmasters didn't even have to use the genjutsu techniques and often had a constant animal companion. I was training to become one of them when we were attacked." "And you say your clan specialized in tracking?" Naruto inquired, getting a nod from the redhead. "How good of a tracker are you?" "About average, personally, but some of our clan's ninja could smell and hear just about everything around them as far as a mile away in any direction," she answered while they started heading back to the center of the village. She then fussed with the scarf around her neck for a moment. "That's why my face is covered with my scarf right now. The smell of the burnt wood and ash and blood, it's too strong for me, being this close to everything." Sounds kind of like the Inuzuka clan back in Konoha," Naruto noted idly. Having heard of their cousin clan, Benihime nodded. That's when she thought of something Naruto had said earlier, back when they first met. You said you're an Uzumaki, right? Benihime asked, getting a look of confusion from the cloaked and hooded blonde before he nodded. She almost smiled. My clan was descended from the Uzumaki and Inuzuka clans, dating back during the Warring Clans era a few decades before the hidden villages were founded. Are really? Naruto exclaimed, suddenly quite excited. Benihime couldn't resist giving him a strange look, having not expected him to get so cheerful. I can't believe it. I thought I was the last Uzumaki. Well, I technically still am, but still. Have you been to Uzushio yet? Benihime asked cautiously, instantly regretting her question when Naruto's joy turned to sadness of his own, shaking his head negatively. Whenever anyone in my clan finished their ninja training, they'd make a pilgrimage to Whirlpool Country to pay our respects to them. I made the trip last year. Maybe I could take you there someday. I'd like that very much. He responded quietly with a small but warm eye smile of gratitude. A thought occurred to him, making him pause for a moment. Were you able to save or recover any of your clan's scrolls? History, jutsu scrolls, anything? Actually, they weren't even touched during the attack. Benihime answered, confusing Naruto a little bit again and making him tilt his head slightly. She pointed down at the ground. We keep them safe underground in a special vault. That's actually what I had come to take care of when I saw you this morning. Well, I've got some spare storage scrolls if you need any. Naruto offered while taking out one such scroll to show her. Thanks, I wasn't really looking forward to carrying them all on my own. Benihime responded, giving him a small eye smile of her own. After leading him back towards the middle of the village, Benihime went to one of the larger buildings, despite being nothing more than a platform of blackened wood and ash. A couple minutes of searching around and she found the hidden hatch embedded in the floor, prying it open with some difficulty. Come on, it's down here. Wow, the place looks like it was never touched. Naruto commented idly while following Benihime down the admittedly steep staircase, the hall being a bit narrow. Thankfully, it had handrails mounted to the walls to keep from falling. And it's really dark down here. This place is protected by seals we learned from the Uzumaki clan to keep our scrolls safe. Benihime responded, pausing for a moment to glance back at Naruto, her slit pupils having dilated to compensate for the darkness. And we don't keep any lighting down here except for the main chamber to keep any unwanted visitors from finding our scrolls so easily. Akaju have natural night vision. Speaking of which, do you need any help finding your way? Actually, no, I can see just fine. Naruto answered honestly, pointing to his own eyes. I've got pretty good night vision myself thanks to certain circumstances. You mean the Kyuubi, right? Benihime asked casually as she started walking again, the question nearly making Naruto trip in his shock. She didn't so much as glance back at him. You smell kind of like a fox and only Uzumaki have been known to contain the Kyuubi properly. Plus, Konoha was attacked by the Kyuubi about 16 years ago, so I just kind of put two and two together. I'm sorry if I crossed a line or something. And no, it's alright. Naruto stammered a bit sheepishly, also feeling a bit nervous about the subject. It's just that I had a bit of a bad childhood back in Konoha because of it. I left on a training trip with my godfather at 10 and spent the last 6 years traveling. The past month or so has actually been kind of nice since I haven't been harassed or anything because of my status as a Jinchuriki. Then again, no one recognizes me anymore, but it's just a matter of time before people start figuring it out. I'm sorry to hear that. Benihime apologized as they reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into a rather large, but lightless semicircular room with 5 doors on the curved wall ahead of them. Benihime moved towards the second door on the left end, Naruto following close behind her. I've only heard stories of how Jinchuriki are treated. I can only imagine how bad it must have been. It wasn't all bad. The Sandaime Hokages always looked out for my well-being since I was a little kid. Naruto answered with a shrug. He's been something akin to a grandfather to me ever since then. Especially since I'm an orphan. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Benihime tried apologizing yet again while turning to face Naruto, only to have an armored finger pressed to her lips through her scarf to shut her up. She then blushed under her scarf when she saw him give her a sincere eye smile. You apologize too much, you know that? He teased slightly, oblivious to the Akaju Kunoichi's burning hot cheeks as he retracted his hand and kept walking a bit. Fussing with her scarf a little bit. Benihime didn't understand why she was starting to feel nervous and self-conscious about herself the longer she was around the rather handsome blue-eyed shinobi. Granted, she hadn't seen what the rest of him looked like because of his poncho, but he had been kind enough to simply hold her and let her cry for what felt like hours earlier, and he seemed really understanding of her feelings and what she was going through. So, is this it? Huh, what? She blurted out, snapped out of her thoughts about the caring blonde with her. Naruto, ever oblivious to the kunoichi's rapidly growing crush on him, gestured to the large pair of double doors set at the end of the hallway. Forcing herself to calm down, Benihime caught up to him and started explaining, but her cheeks stayed a little rosy. Oh, yes. It's the last defense we have against intruders. A blood seal keeps the doors locked and other seals make them incredibly durable. If anyone somehow manages to force them open, special seals inside the room cast a really strong genjutsu that incapacitates anyone that tries to enter the room. Cool. I haven't had the chance to learn how to make genjutsu seals yet. Naruto commented while stepping closer to the doors, his well-trained eyes picking out the camouflaged seal runes, even in the pitch-black darkness, while Benihime bit her thumb with her fang-like canines and smeared a bit of her blood on the seal set over the crease between the two stone doors. After applying her chakra to it, the blood seal suddenly glowed red for a few seconds before fading away. A second later, the stone doors started to open at a painfully slow rate, grinding against the stone floor and ceiling of the doorway as they did. Beyond them, torches instantly flared to life along the walls, illuminating the large room. Naruto's eyes instantly went wide. From how Benihime made it sound, he was thinking there was only a few dozen scrolls. No, there was close to several hundred scrolls of all sizes neatly organized on large shelf-like scroll racks and bookcases set up all throughout the Akaju clan's secret library. Holy shit. He breathed out, slowly and cautiously stepping into the room with Benihime quietly giggling at his reaction from behind him. He then turned to face her, pointing back towards the scrolls in the room. This is all of it, right? Yes, Naruto-kun, that's all of them. Benihime laughed out before suddenly blushing more heatedly, realizing she had accidentally added kun to his name. Thankfully, Naruto didn't seem to notice it as he wandered into the Akaju clan library, already pulling out a couple storage scrolls. Using only a half seal with his left hand, Naruto summoned up a pair of kage bunshin, passing a storage scroll to either one. Sighing quietly in relief since he apparently didn't catch what she said, she followed the blonde into the room. Alright, you take that section and you take that one over there. Try to keep everything organized. Naruto instructed his clones while taking out a storage scroll himself and kneeling down in front of another section of scroll racks. Unfurling the scroll he had, Naruto put his hands on the seal running throughout it and channeled a small amount of chakra into it. A moment later, a cloud of smoke erupted from it before revealing a stack of a dozen unused storage scrolls, surprising Benihime a little bit. Picking up a couple of them, he held them out to her. You know how to seal things away in scrolls, right? Yeah, she answered while taking the offered scrolls and heading to another section of the library. While Naruto and his clones got to work, Benihime snuck another glance at the blonde and smiled. Maybe there was still hope. Shit. Naruto stammered out in surprise as he tripped on the last step as they left the library, partly blinded by the incredible glare of the late afternoon sun, his hood not really helping as much as he hoped. Giggling behind him as the blonde hit the ground, Benihime let her amusement distract her before tripping over the same step as Naruto, her laughing stopping instantly while her eyes went wide. Ah! She cried out as she fell forward just as Naruto rolled onto his back and started to sit up. Their eyes met for a split second before impact, their foreheads colliding and knocking Naruto flat on his back while Benihime, after falling completely, curled up a little on top of the blonde with a soft whimper of pain, holding her hurting head in her hands. Aitai. Ooh. Naruto groaned quietly from his spot, still blinking the stars out of his vision before squeezing his eyes shut, his head throbbing from a mild headache. It didn't help that his eyes hadn't fully adjusted to the light, prompting him to pull his hood down over his face completely to block out the sun. Blushing beneath his mask a little bit, Naruto was cursing his clumsiness again. Why was it always him that had the bad luck with things? Then there was the hysterical laughter echoing in his head, making him grit his teeth slightly. Shut up, Kitsune Teme. Oh, that was too good. Kyuubi laughed out, sounding like it was having some trouble breathing. Do that again. Asshole fox. Naruto mentally grumbled to himself as he cut the mental link and started sitting up again, still holding his head in pain. Beside him, Benihime was already sitting up beside him with her legs tucked under her, rubbing her forehead tenderly with her head bowed down slightly so that her bangs hid her eyes. You alright? Why yeah, sorry. Benihime stuttered out quietly, feeling really embarrassed by how awkward and graceless she was sometimes. It was just her luck that she'd get smacked upside her head by karma while laughing at someone else's clumsiness. Stop apologizing, Naruto muttered while pushing himself up to his feet, dusting off some of the ash as he did. When he tapped Benihime's shoulder, she jumped slightly and looked up at him in surprise before noting his outstretched hand. Blushing a little more under her scarf, she grabbed it with her own and let him help her stand back up. Looking back down at his poncho, Naruto sighed heavily upon seeing the gray-white stains from the ash that covered the floor. Damn it. I can't go on a single mission without ruining this thing in some way, can I? I'm sore. Benihime cut herself short when Naruto glanced up at her with a cocked eyebrow. Blushing heavily beneath her scarf, she was really confused as to why she was acting like she was. Normally, she would barely ever apologize to someone, even if she knew she was in the wrong, and was the exact polar opposite of shy. So why was she now? Without even realizing it, Benihime bowed her head slightly, muttering a single word under her breath that made Naruto sigh again. Sorry, it's starting to get late. Do you have a camp set up nearby? Naruto noted and then asked while glancing up at the sky, only to look back to Benihime. Why yeah, sort of. She mumbled out. It's near the river about a kilometer to the west of us. Alright, lead the way, Benihime. Naruto remarked while holding an arm out towards the west, eyes smiling at her. He never noticed how she blushed shyly under her scarf before doing as he said, walking in the direction of the camp she had set up away from her clan's destroyed village. As midnight neared, Naruto stayed where he was next to the small campfire. He had set up his tent for Benihime to sleep in since she didn't have any sort of shelter to protect her from the weather and such, the river being close by. Glancing over at the small woodland camouflaged tent, he smiled sadly beneath his mask. On the way to her campsite, he had seen the remains of a large funeral pyre, having obviously burned the bodies of her clansmen recently to keep their secrets from being discovered by anyone as well as to give them a proper send-off. Thinking of the tragedy she had been forced to experience, Naruto's resolve steeled, having made his decision earlier. He was actually just a cage bunshin tasked with keeping an eye on the girl, 5 others hidden amongst the trees around them, while the original was already tracking down the bandits. Don't worry, Benihime, the clone thought to itself while adding another small log to the fire, the flickering flames reflected in his hardened sapphire irises. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Miles away, Naruto, the real one, came to a stop near the edge of the bandits' camp, crouching on top of a branch while staring down into the small ravine they had taken refuge in. He could tell that they had lost more than half their numbers when they attacked the Akaju clan, many of the unused tents having been dismantled and set aside. Forming a half-seal with his right hand, Naruto summoned a dozen cage bunshin with his plan in mind, all of them leaping from their spots in the trees and rushing the camp, his clones spreading out to take up their positions along the ravine's cliff-like ridge that encircled the camp. Just as he reached the camp, his clones flashed through a couple hand seals before slamming their hands against the ground. Doden! Doryu Heki! All of his clones called out simultaneously, alerting the bandits to his presence as a towering wall of earth suddenly rose up and completely enclosed the bandit camp, the clones dispelling as they used up all of the chakra they had been given. Naruto's eyes were narrowed dangerously once more, his eyes as cold as chips of ice. Bandits came clamoring out of their tents, their shoddy armor and weapons clattering noisily as their eyes went straight to the 50-foot tall earth wall surrounding them on all sides. What the hell? What's going on? One of the bandits cried amongst their startled murmuring and chattering, fingers slowly curling into tight fists. Naruto gnashed his teeth, his eyes bleeding into crimson as Kyuubi let its chakra leak into Naruto's system as per the blonde's unspoken request. "Over here, dumb fucks." Naruto growled quietly from his spot, still standing at the base of the lone slope that led into the ravine. Despite keeping his voice low, everyone heard it and immediately faced the poncho-wearing blonde. Some of them laughed, thinking he would be an easy kill, obviously forgetting about the wall's sudden appearance. Many of the veteran bandits, however, got nervous. They knew of the things ninja could do, the earth wall being one of them. "The Akaju clan sends their regards." "Wah!" One of the bandits tried saying, only for Naruto to throw a handful of kunai at them with a sweep of his right hand, each aimed for an instant kill spot. Immediately, half a dozen bandits dropped to the ground, dead. Before the remaining 80 or so could fully react, Naruto ripped his poncho off and grabbed one of the scrolls at his hips, swiftly unfurling it and pressing his free hand to the center of the seal inside of it. In a puff of smoke, a seemingly misshapen piece of golden metal appeared in his hand before the blonde slapped it against his upper back behind his shoulders, the plate mounting itself to his back with his chakra while the scroll snapped shut in his other hand, holstering it once again. Clapping his hands together in front of his chest in the form of a tiger seal with his extended fingers pointing out towards the bandits, Naruto activated the seals embedded in the piece of armor. "Teorita Roku Basushin no Chikara," Naruto stated coldly and apathetically before 4 more arms of golden metal sprouted from the back of his shoulders with 2 left-handed arms behind his left shoulder and 2 right-handed arms behind his right shoulder. The top pair of arms had formed another tiger seal pointing upwards just above his head while the bottom pair formed another tiger seal, this one pointing downwards, just in front of his unarmored stomach. Many of the bandits started getting spooked, but they had nowhere to go. Like trapped rats, they committed an act of pure fear-fueled desperation as they charged him, the 6-armed blonde's hands already flashing through 3 different sets of seals, stating the name of 2 techniques as he finished their seals. Kaiten, Dai Enden, Futon, Repusho. The bandits howled in terror and agony as the flames erupted from the hole in the front of Naruto's mask, the hurricane force winds unleashed by the palm thrusts of his middle set of hands further enhancing the flames' heat and intensity, spreading to cover the entire group in seconds, burning them all to ash almost instantly. Cutting off the Dai Enden as the winds died down, Naruto kept his bottom set of hands in the downward tiger seal they had started in, holding off on his finisher as he waited for the smoke to clear out. Something was bugging him, though. Where were the missing nin that Benihime said had been with the bandits? "Oh, my. He must really mean business, eh?" a mocking voice remarked from beyond the smoke as it started to thin. Staring at him from across the scorched battlefield was a 6-foot-tall man wearing almost all black pants, black long-sleeved top, black cloth face mask, dark gray hunter nin-style mask, black gloves, dark gray Konoha-style flak vest with a black hood attached to the collar that was tossed over his head. Loosely tied around his neck was his scarred Konoha Hite 8. Gripped in his hands were a pair of ninjutsu-like swords with curved blades and curved black handles. Beside the man was a woman wearing a black skin-tight full bodysuit with dark red clawed bracers just like Benihime's on her arms, a set of dark red body armor set over her torso, dark red greaves strapped to her shins and the top of her feet, black closed-toe kunoichi sandals on her feet, and a black hunter nin-style mask over her face with the dark red Akaju eye markings decorating the eye slits. Her hair color was similar to Benihime's, being dark crimson with black highlights and tips, but it was kept in a high ponytail and only reached to the middle of her back. The man noted how Naruto's scarlet eyes narrowed furiously, the blonde recognizing the woman to be an Akaju, a traitor to her own clan. "I think he's mad." "No," Naruto hissed while his third pair of hands slipped from their upside-down tiger seal to his praying seal before separating, the wind around him kicking up into a surging vortex for a few seconds before condensing and splitting into 6 small lines, his armored hands grabbing a hold of all 6 wind swords. It was a more destructive variation of Kei's no Yaiba he called Roku Hakai Takina Kei's. "I'm downright pissed." "Oh?" the man remarked, tilting his head curiously while Naruto raised all 6 wind swords above his head, only to swing them down and unleash 6 destructive currents of shredding wind straight for them. Both rogues instantly split up, heading in different directions. The masked man instantly recognized his folly the moment they were moving, his eyes watching as Naruto's body split into two identical beings via Kage Bunshin, either one still wielding all 6 wind swords. Shit. Channeling chakra into his swords, the rogue man barely blocked the 6-armed blonde's first slash, a whirlwind of invisible razor blades whipping about him and leaving shallow cuts all over his body. From there, it became an intense speed battle for the man, moving as fast as he could to block the wind swords, gritting his teeth as he ignored the pain of the cuts littering his body, fresh ones appearing every time he blocked one of the golden ninja's blades. Across the way, the Akaju woman wasn't faring much better. She had blocked one of Naruto's wind swords and learned, just as her partner did, that it came with a price. Bloody cuts and scratches were everywhere on her body, the outer claw on her left bracer having been lost during the initial clash due to insufficient chakra being channeled into them to defend against Naruto's cutting wind chakra. "You betrayed your own people." Naruto, the real one, growled as they locked blades again, this time with all 6 of his crossed over each other while the woman blocked with her claws crossed. She remained standing for only a second before the pressure doubled, dropping her to one knee as Naruto poured chakra into his arms to amplify his strength even more. "Your only reward is death." Shit. The woman grunted out through gnashed teeth, her arms shaking with the strain of holding back her opponent's wind swords. It was suddenly lessened by a considerable amount when Naruto retracted 2 of the swords, only to swing them in an upward arc. Her eyes went wide beneath her mask as her remaining 5 claws were sheared from her bracers, twin parallel razor-thin gashes running up her torso from her hips to her shoulders. Already falling backwards from the guard breaker, the Akaju woman could only watch as Naruto swung all 6 of his wind swords back down in what felt like slow motion to her. When they drew close enough for her to feel the many conflicting wind currents from all 6 blades, she closed her eyes and let it happen. In an explosion of wind, the woman's body was shredded by the infinite number of unseen blades until there was nothing left of her. Managing a lucky blow, the man dispelled the clone he had been faced with by cutting off one of its hands, thankful that it wasn't actually made of metal like the original. Despite the shallow victory, he could only stare in shock at the thick cloud of dust that shrouded the blonde Konoha shinobi and his partner, who had come to him and his bandits seeking to destroy her own clan in order to gain access to the Akaju's most dangerous of techniques. "Stupid woman," he hissed under his breath before turning and running for the earth walls, having lost one of his swords during the sword battle with the shadow clone while the other was now useless due to the cracks in the blade. Using chakra to scale the vertical surface, it didn't take him long to get close to the top, but that was when he felt a hand grab the back of his head before the momentum behind it drove him face first into the wall itself. Mask smashed against the packed soil and rock before being left to fall to the ground. The man stared up at the 6-armed golden demon that stared back down at him with its terrifying blood-red eyes. And then it moved, running down the wall and heading straight for him to continue its assault. Brown eyes going wide, the man could do nothing as one of the hands grabbed his ankle, the demon kicking off from the wall while twisting his body, only to sling him into the ground seconds away from landing and leave him lying in a shallow crater from the sheer power of the throw. "Gua, you're not going anywhere, trash." Naruto snarled before landing on the man's chest with a brutal double kick. Ignoring the blood the man coughed up during mid-impact as ribs cracked and broke under the force. Kicking off and flipping in mid-air, Naruto's 6 hands formed 3 different hand seals while he took a deep breath, only to pull his hands apart and exhale, unleashing another Kaden. Dai Enden. The man was unable to move, let alone attempt to dodge. Thus, he was burned to death, unable to even scream in pain. Landing on his feet a little bit away from the flaming corpse, Naruto took a few deep breaths, feeling Kyuubi's chakra released back into the seal. Dropping to his knees as his 4 extra arms disappeared back into the plate mounted to his back, Naruto gasped for breath, suddenly far more exhausted than he had expected. "That took a lot more out of me than I expected. I shouldn't have used so many ninjutsu techniques." Taking the plate off of his back and storing it back in its proper scroll, Naruto slipped the scroll back in its proper holster before getting back up and forming one last hand seal. Giving off a pulse of chakra, the earth walls he had erected in the beginning began to crumble and fall apart. Stumbling slightly as he started walking back in the direction of Beniheims camp, picking up and putting his poncho back on as he did, Naruto decided it would be best if she didn't know an Akaju had betrayed her clan. Reaching into one of his equipment pouches, Naruto pulled out a protein bar before starting to snack on it as he walked, trying to restore some of his lost chakra as he headed back to Beniheim's campsite. It wasn't long before he suddenly winced, one of his clones with the sole surviving Akaju having been killed by the enraged redhead when she found out he wasn't actually there. "Here's to hoping she calms down before I get there," Naruto mumbled to himself a little nervously. His clone had learned what it felt like to get stabbed in the face by Beniheim's claws. Still wearing his hooded poncho, Naruto sighed quietly as they drew closer to Konoha, going by the road this time, Benihime walking ahead of him on the path. She hadn't said anything to him since giving him a very thorough tongue lashing earlier that morning when he got back to camp. And it was starting to bother him now that it was getting close to late afternoon. Sure, he'd gotten the silent treatment a few times before in the past, but that was back when he and Karasu were kids. At least she would still glare at him or punch him for no real reason. Thinking of the Uchiha, he figured it might do him some good to pay her a visit instead of just breaking into her apartment all the time to make sure she eats right without burning her apartment down. He then had a slight feeling of dread crawl up his spine as he thought about that. She's probably set up traps just to get back at me for disappearing on her without saying anything again. I said I was sorry, Naruto mumbled, talking to Benihime. She didn't react or even acknowledge the fact she heard him, and he was getting tired of it. Heaving a loud sigh of exasperation, Naruto walked a little faster to catch up to her before poking her in the side. Hard. Ow, what the hell, Naruto? Benihime snapped at him, glaring at him while holding her tender side. He got her right in one of her floating ribs. He simply gave her a flat look that told her he wasn't amused with her childish punishment for him. I needed to make sure you weren't a deaf zombie, he mumbled back before continuing on his way, getting a look from Benihime as if he just grew a second head. Once she couldn't see, he was smirking mischievously beneath his mask, knowing it would have gotten a reaction out of her. The Akaju might be a stubborn girl, but she was nowhere near the level of him or Karasu. They would get their point across no matter what. A moment later, however. Itai, jackass. Benihime snarled at him while marching past the now limping blonde, having kicked him in the back of his leg. Eyebrow twitching, Naruto knew they were either going to end up brawling before too long or he was going to get her to start talking to him again like she was yesterday. I get rid of her family's killers and this is how she treats me, just great. Naruto muttered to himself under his breath, rubbing the back of his thigh in an effort to get rid of the pain in it, but Benihime, true to her clan's senses, heard him. She spun around to face him, jabbing a finger into his chest. No, this is how I treat people that think they have to do everything for me. Benihime growled while making Naruto take a couple steps back from her poking him. When she finished, however, she decided to throw in a little extra by stomping on his toes. On the other leg. Ow, god damn it, Naruto hissed, both legs hurting now. Stop hurting me, you started it, she shot back, glaring at him defiantly. It only made Naruto grind his teeth behind his mask. Bullshit, you wouldn't talk to me and I was getting sick and tired of being ignored. Naruto argued back, pouting childishly and stubbornly. Benihime crossed her arms under her chest and glared off to the side, her cheeks burning hot under her scarf. You should have at least told me where you were going, she muttered irritably. Caught off guard by her suddenly getting quieter instead of louder, Naruto let his anger deflate somewhat and sighed heavily. And risk you following and possibly getting hurt in the process? Naruto countered, shaking his head slightly. There's a reason why I'm by myself, Benihime. I'm simply too destructive to fight effectively with teammates or partners or whatever. I'm still mad at you, she muttered quietly before taking a step closer and leaning against him, her arms still crossed over her chest stubbornly. Smiling slightly under his mask, Naruto pat the top of her head slightly before crouching down and hooking his arm behind her knees, catching her off guard as he lifted her up and sat her down on his shoulder. Blushing up a storm, Benihime looked like she was on the verge of a heart attack as she held onto him as tight as she could from her position. Naruto, put me down right now. Down? He questioned with false innocence and Benihime instantly regretted it when Naruto tipped forward, making her fall forward off of his shoulder while he grabbed her by the ankle and hung her upside down. She, predictably, screamed as she fell forward, the blonde holding her out at arm's length to keep her from hitting him or anything. He then gave her a flat look, one eyebrow cocked. You going to start being nice again? Why yes, 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 yes. Just put me back on my feet. Benihime cried almost instantly, the blonde doing as she wished and stood her back up on her 2 feet. The moment he let go of her, she whipped around and looked about ready to beat the living hell out of him, but she suddenly stopped and leaned against him again, burying her face against his poncho-covered chest as she held onto him, shivering slightly. For a moment, he was confused, but then he realized that she was actually a little scared. Don't do that, I won't, he mumbled quietly while gently hugging her for a moment. As they started walking again, Naruto glanced over at her. Sorry for scaring you like that. She stayed silent, rubbing her arm nervously while avoiding eye contact. The rest of their walk was spent in a relatively semi-comfortable silence. Ah, I'm sorry to hear about your family and village, Benihime-san. Hiruzen responded after receiving a summarized verbal report of the mission from Naruto, the red-haired Akaju standing beside him. So, I take it that since you came to Konoha with Naruto, that you'll be joining us? Hi, Benihime answered curtly and quietly, her emotions running a little rampant again after recounting the events of her clan's demise. I'm sure you'll be needing lodgings. The Sandame trailed off as he started shuffling through some of his papers, having seen a temporary residency form somewhere amongst the chaos that littered his desk. Actually, she can stay with me if she wants. Naruto spoke up, surprising the room's other 2 occupants, the Akaju beside him blushing slightly at the offer. I have plenty of room at my place and it'd give me a reason to go home every night. Only because you don't know how to relax once in a while. Hiruzen commented knowingly, giving the blonde a look that made Naruto eyes smile sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. Glancing between them, Benihime was completely confused and the Sandame decided to explain. Ever since he became a Tokubetsu genin, Naruto rarely ever goes home. More often than not, we've caught him passed out in the records department while working on his paperwork, or he trains himself into the ground until he passes out in the middle of a training field. Wait, hold up, Benihime called out before turning on Naruto, pointing a finger in his face with the blonde leaning back slightly and eyeing the finger warily. You're just a genin? Tokubetsu genin, there's a difference. Naruto mumbled in a small voice, his correction doing nothing to alleviate Benihime's apparent disbelief. Hiruzen sighed and palmed his face, wishing he hadn't taken the last of his aspirin that morning. He had a feeling he would need it very soon now that he had to deal with 2 teenagers currently bickering in his office.
That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, share and do comments.